presidency in European Union, we also have some of the complications in bilateral relations. But I think that the major narrative we have in our mind that we have to invest heavily in building our relations with our neighboring countries and the key allies, and there's no alternative to that.
All right. Well, sadly, we're out of time, but Olga Stefanishina, I thank you so much for joining me on Hard Talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
That was Hard Talk. I'm Saroja Coelho. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio, and you're listening to us as we're live in downtown Winnipeg on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube. Wow, it's foggy out there. There were points where I was like, wow, am I going to have to put on some better headlights? Foggy through the city of Winnipeg and a little bit muggy as well. Our actual daytime high for our Friday here is going to be 29 degrees. We're on air till 8:37 with you. If you have a problem in traffic early, here's the number, 788-3093. And hopefully if you are out on the highways, you're keeping that fog in mind. Give us a call. Let us know what it's like for you. Let's say good morning to the team. Good morning, Brad Lillies on the other side of the glass in the control room. Good morning, Chloe Friesen, who's done an awesome job all week directing the show and covering weather and traffic on air. Also doing an awesome job, Sierra Sanders behind the controls this morning once again. And Matt Humphrey, who's here from our news department. So let's turn our attention to headlines. Hi, Matt.
Good morning. The federal labor minister says freight traffic on Canada's two largest rail networks could resume within days. The two labor disputes are being sent to binding arbitration. Yesterday, CN Rail and CPKC locked out more than 9,000 employees. But less than 17 hours later, the labor minister stepped in and referred the dispute to the Canada Industrial Relations Board for a solution. And the Women's Resource Centre in Brandon is taking steps to tackle intimate partner violence. They say recent homicides in McCreary and Carman show how dangerous domestic violence can be. So they're launching a year-long research project on women and gender equity, visiting rural communities to examine the ongoing crisis. I'll have more news after World Report.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Back soon.
Yesterday, speaking to that story, the Premier was on the program talking about wanting to seek advice from public health to declare gender violence, to declare intimate partner violence, rather, an epidemic formally. What would that mean, though? What impact would that actually have on people's health, well-being, and, of course, safety? Later this morning, we're going to take you to another province that's ahead of us on this, to Ontario. They could soon see intimate partner violence declared an epidemic there as well. So that they have a bill already on the books, Bill 173. We're going to learn all about it and also find out why they were seeking this designation there. In addition, in the first hour of the show, I'm quite excited about this. We're going to be talking about all things bonsai. And we're going to have a bonsai tree expert in the studio with us. Right now, though, 1 minute to 6 in World Report.
Today on Q.
When I first began.
Tom Power, Men Have Called Her Crazy, is the title of a new memoir by artist Anna Marie Tendler. She talks about mental health, using photography as a means of survival, and why she didn't mention her public divorce from John Mulaney in the book.
Q, this morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm John Northcott.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris accepting the Democratic Party nomination for president, wrapping up the 4-day Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Let's game on now for the matchup with Republican nominee for President Donald Trump. The CBC's Ithel Musa is in Chicago. Ithel, what stood out for you in last night's acceptance speech?
Well, certainly the energy and the enthusiasm. Vice President Kamala Harris used her speech to reintroduce herself to Americans, the daughter of immigrants from a middle-class background who rose from prosecutor to vice president. Harris promised Americans to tackle major policy issues like protecting the right to abortion and lowering the cost of health care, housing, and groceries. Harris also addressed the Israel-Hamas war, saying she will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, but she did say this.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Okay, the convention is over. Anyone who's been watching over the last 4 days, it's pretty clear that she has her party behind her. What comes next, Ethel?
Harris will now head back to the campaign trail. She only has a few months before the election and only a few weeks before her presidential debate with Donald Trump. This is a historic moment in U.S. politics. Harris is the first female vice president, and she's the first Black woman and person of South Asian descent to lead a major party ticket. The hope among Democrats is that she'll be able to ride this wave of excitement. But during his speech at the convention, former President Barack Obama warned it will be a tight race, and there's still a lot of work to be done by Democrats to defeat Trump.
CBC's Ethel Musa in Chicago. Thanks, Ethel.
You're welcome.
Teamsters Canada Rail says the lockout with CN Rail is now over and members will begin returning to work today. But the work stoppage will continue for now at Canadian Pacific Kansas City. As Yvette Bren tells us, it could be a while before the country returns to regular service.
Both Canada's main rail networks ground to a halt for less than a day.
The fact that there's two, that kind of takes the cake.
Before Federal Labour Minister Steve McKinnon stepped in.
Gave them every possibility and every resource. Unfortunately, we are at an impasse. Fundamentally, we are asking the board to direct a resumption of activities and a return to work at the railways.
But Alberta Transportation Minister Devin Dreesche suggested intervention should have happened before it got to this point, saying inept labour negotiations cost Canada
billions of dollars worth of a mistake that the federal government couldn't do the right thing early when they had the opportunity to. And it also just points out the labour chaos that is currently commonplace here in Canada.
McKinnon says Canada's trade reputation is intact and hopes the plan will prevent the lockout from dragging on. In Montreal, before the minister's announcement, National Teamsters Union's François Laporte said safety issues are at the heart of this dispute.
Safety of the rail in general. We don't want to see another lac mégantic to happen again.
As he and other rail workers now look to see what this government intervention will look like and if the union's concerns will finally be addressed. Yvette Bren, CBC News, Vancouver.
Narendra Modi is in Kyiv for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. India's leader is positioning himself as a possible broker for peace in the region. As Julia Chapman reports, that's despite India maintaining close ties with Russia ever since it invaded Ukraine.
यूक्रेन और पश्चिम एशिया में चल रहे संघर्ष.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying to strike a balance. He's long pushed for diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine. At the same time, India has benefited from cut-price Russian oil and remains a major buyer of Russian weapons. India is known for what it calls non-alignment, a policy of neutrality its critics describe as opportunism.
This is part of India trying to project its rising status.
Bhavna Dave is from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London.
Eventually, this had to take place, and especially given the global status that India is projecting, India could not have just remained aligned or talking to Russia and not being engaged with Ukraine.
Mr. Modi was in Moscow just a few weeks ago. While he was there, bombs fell on a children's hospital in Kyiv on one of the bloodiest days of the war. That same day, Modi shared a hug with President Vladimir Putin, which President Volodymyr Zelensky called a devastating blow to peace efforts. Traveling to Kyiv suggests Mr. Modi is willing to listen to both sides. Officials in Kyiv are hopeful that he can exert pressure on Moscow, but Ukraine is unlikely to convince India to distance itself from Russia completely. Julia Chapman, CBC News, London.
The trade dispute between China and the West continues to heat up. Beijing now says it will look into government subsidies being provided to European dairy producers. As Lisa Shing reports, it's a tit-for-tat response following an announcement by Brussels that the EU is revising tariffs on electric vehicles made in China.
a possible retaliatory tariff can possibly give EU pause for thought.
Gil Lan, a professor of international trade at Toronto Metropolitan University, says China's latest move is moderate as it opens an investigation into European subsidies on dairy imports.
It could have just put the tariffs on immediately, but that would go against its narrative about being a responsible world trading power.
Earlier this week, the EU revised its proposed tariff hike on Chinese electric vehicle imports, down slightly to 36%. But Beijing had called on Brussels to scrap the increase altogether. China will take all necessary measures to defend the rights and interests of Chinese companies, said spokesperson Mao Ning. The ongoing trade spat, a result of Brussels launching an investigation into China's state support for EV makers. All this as the West scrambles to bolster its domestic manufacturing, and China threatens to overtake international markets. The U.S. slapped on 100% tariffs in the spring. Canada is currently considering its next steps. If it follows suit, it could mean
essentially asking Canadian consumers to pay a high price for electric vehicles.
University of Alberta economics professor Jia Tongzong says China and Western countries will have to weigh their priorities because an escalation could also mean a big hit to other domestic industries. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Ottawa says it will no longer pay for temporary accommodations in Pakistan for new applicants for a program meant to help former Afghan employees of the Canadian government or military move to Canada. Rafi Bujikanian reports.
Islamabad, Pakistan. A group of Afghans chant at a protest targeting Ottawa. Some say they've been in the Pakistani capital for nearly 3 years while waiting to find out if they'll be admitted to Canada on special immigration measures meant for former employees of the Canadian government or armed forces. The government put those in place after the Taliban took over Afghanistan, sending former staff of Western forces into hiding.
We put our families in danger.
Muhammad Yunus Nasimi moved to Islamabad with his wife and children from Afghanistan in October 2021. The former Canadian military contractor is still waiting for a decision on his immigration application.
How come you are making me sit here?
Some migrants say the wait is wasteful as their stay is subsidized by the federal government until they're approved for travel to Canada or receive a final rejection. The Immigration Department tells CBC News it's paid close to $43 million for Afghans waiting in Pakistan since 2022. But it says it has stopped providing money for accommodations to any new applicants since the end of June.
I would urge the government to err on the side of caution.
Zul Solomon is an immigration lawyer in Vancouver. He says Ottawa did make a promise to Afghans.
It's a large group of people who very much helped us.
The government says more than 53,000 Afghans have moved here since 2021. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. Remember, for news anytime, go to our website, cbcnews.ca. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at Information Radio. You're on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube. Foggy out there. So take it easy with that. In Winnipeg, our current temperature is 19 degrees. Well, we have lots coming up this hour on the program. We are going to be talking at 6:20 about a national debate that's going on right now about harm reduction in addictions policy. As you might have heard in national news this week, in Ontario, the government there announcing its plan to shut down 10 supervised injection sites as we await the development of our very first sites here in Winnipeg. We're going to hear this morning from a public health researcher about what all of this means for mental health care across Canada and the context through which cities might look at all of these different decisions being made. In addition, at 6:40 today, we have a lovely interview coming up all about bonsai trees. Actually, right around 10 to 7 is when we'll have that for you. So if you're thinking of branching out when it comes to creative hobbies, the Japanese art of growing and shaping miniature trees, bonsai, is something you might be able to try this weekend. The president of the Bonsai Society of Winnipeg is going to join us with some tiny trees. I'm really pretty happy about that. Feels very Friday. It is 6:11 a.m. Let's get into the headlines here. Back to serious things. Matt Humphrey is in. Good morning.
Good morning. The federal labor minister has stepped in to get trains moving again. It comes after an unprecedented lockout by Canada's two largest rail companies. The labor minister used his power to ask the Canada Industrial Relations Board to impose final binding arbitration, asking the board to order the railways to resume operations under the terms of the current collective agreements until new deals are in place. And a women's resource center in Brandon wants to take the crisis of intimate partner violence head on. This year, there have been 2 mass homicides in rural Manitoba. The team at the resource center will visit rural communities to figure out how to best help domestic violence victims, and will launch a year-long research project on women and gender equity. We'll hear more about that at the bottom of the hour.
Can we just have a moment for your good hair?
Thanks.
I like it.
I approached it like it was a bonsai tree and pruned it back.
It's I like it. I like the fade in the side. I like the cut.
Just
Very
across
good.
the street, Benny's.
Hi, Benny.
Yeah.
Is the name actually Benny?
Yeah.
Your barber?
Benny's,
I like
Benny's
that.
barber. And Benny's barber.
I also now, good morning, Chloe Friesen.
Good morning.
In studio.
I need a haircut.
Also excellent hair.
Go to Benny's.
No, it's a little unruly.
I get to share the story now about how I cut my husband's, not the fade part, but he let me do the part and shave the back during the pandemic.
That's a lot of
Remember
trust.
when?
Yeah.
Remember when
Oh, yeah.
nobody could go anywhere? So this one time, once I got good at it, at first I was very careful, very careful. Then there was this one moment where we ordered pizza. And I was really hungry, and he's like, let's just do my hair while we're waiting for the pizza. So we're doing the pizza, and he's looking in the mirror at himself. That's me doing the shaver.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe that's better. Zzz. Anyhow, so I'm going zzz, and then I stop, and then he looks and he goes, what's wrong? And I'm like, nothing, everything's good. So the thing went like into the line that's supposed to be perfect on your hair. Like it went, it just zipped in a little bit.
Oh, no.
And I thought, no, I didn't. And sure enough, when I brushed it back, because he's got longer hair on the top, this long piece came out that I'd completely cut off.
Oh, you got it.
So then he's like, you did it, didn't you? You did it. And then I'm like, it's okay. Then he feels it. He's like, oh, you were on the edge of bad. And then he looks at me and he goes, are you thinking about the pizza?
You're hungry right now.
He's like, you're being cavalier because you're thinking about the food. I'm like, it's true.
You can't get attached to your hair.
You can't.
It grows back.
He was cool with it. And the haircut was probably better than the pizza that night, as I recall. So.
And it's the pandemic, so no one's seeing you.
A little forgiving?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone's hair is kind of weird.
It's true.
My pandemic haircut was shaving it all off.
Yeah, I did the same thing.
Yeah.
It's very freeing.
Just get ahead of it.
Yep.
And mine went opposite. People before the pandemic, I had shoulder length hair and I came out with like hair halfway down the front of my body. Yeah. Just let it grow. All right. 6:14. Hair memories are not what we're here for. We should be talking about the weather and traffic, and that's what Chloe is here for.
Hello. Yeah. Marcy mentioned that it's foggy out there. We're actually under a fog advisory here in Winnipeg. Dense fog has developed over the Red River Valley early this morning. It is resulting in near zero visibility at times, depending where you are. So if you are commuting early this morning, make sure all of those lights are on and you're just being very, very careful. That fog will dissipate throughout the morning here. So just keep that in mind early today. Right now in Winnipeg, 19 degrees. In Brandon, we are looking at a temperature of 11, mainly sunny, looking at a high of 29, a humidex of 35. And I want to talk about Dauphin and Thompson, both under an air quality advisory right now. That's due to wildfire smoke causing very poor air quality and reduced visibility in the area. So just a reminder, listen to your body. If you're experiencing symptoms, reduce or stop outdoor activities. In Dauphin, we're looking at a high of 25 today with the humidex feeling like 30. And in Thompson, widespread smoke, high of 21, feeling like 25 with that humidex. As I mentioned, commute could be foggy for you, so stay safe out there. If you notice anything or you want to tell me how that fog is treating you, you can give us a call, 204-788-3093.
Well, as Matt mentioned, there is a big conversation happening right now out of the latest tragedy around McCreary about intimate partner violence. So cases of intimate partner violence have now renewed calls for more resources in family shelters in Manitoba. The recent case in McCreary just last week, and then, of course, what happened in Carman in February. Now, this is something that a partnership between Red River College Polytechnic and the Manitoba Association of Women's Shelters is actually hoping to address through something they're creating. It's a tuition-free course. The Shelter Support Worker Micro-Credential course provides training for careers in homeless and family violence shelters. The latest cohort of students just completed, in fact, their credentials this week. Nadine Powell is an instructor for the course, and Abby Jo Chohan is a student who just completed the program. They joined guest host Emily Brass to talk about it on Up to Speed yesterday, and Emily started talking to Abby Jo about why she wanted to enroll.
So I already work at Norwest Co-op. I am a family violence support worker. Every single day we see so many different cases, and obviously it's heartbreaking. And to see that how little support is available in our province is also heartbreaking. Like, there should be a safe place where people can lean on. And this is a journey towards that.
So you're probably trying to help people deal with those intense emotions.
Yeah. And it's difficult as a person who's dealing with them and also trying to find appropriate help and resources.
Yeah. And how do you, get through that and be able to share some kind of strength and light to people?
Well, just the family support, and also try not to taking it home, and which is a very difficult part of the job because every day is different. You see different issues, you see different people, and sometimes it's like really heartbreaking. And then all you have to do is get up the next day and try to do your best.
And Nadine, you're one of the instructors. What can you tell us about enrollment and how the interest has been since the course began?
We're very excited to see that the course is and the program is growing and evolving. We're grateful for all of the support that the program has been attracting, and interest is also growing in the program. Of course, this is a long-standing issue and concern for our province, and definitely there's a high need for workers. So a program like this helps fill that labor gap. We also train workers in self-care. So as you were mentioning earlier, this is very difficult work, and the people that do it are very committed, and it takes a really special drive, commitment to do this kind of work. And one of the things we offer in the course is to help people who are working on the front lines also have skills in self-care. So the difficult situations that we deal with on a ongoing basis, part of the training is also being able to take care of yourself. So
sounds like it's kind of a calling, and we've been hearing about a need for more staff and shelters in our province to help people in abusive relationships. How does the course address those issues?
Well, with the numbers that we that come through the program each iteration, we're hoping that the students will choose to fill some of those gaps and address the need for more workers, more support workers, adding kind of some new dimensions to shelter support. Another side of it is providing the skills and and trained workers that can help fill those labor gaps.
Mm-hmm. And, it's the second cohort to come through the program. Have you seen some improvement in the number of support workers now working in family shelters?
I would say some of our graduates are already working in these spaces, working in the shelter support field. We're already seeing an effect that the program is having.
That's so encouraging. And of course, one of these special people you're mentioning is Abby Jo, who's also on the line. What's coming next for you now that you completed the program?
Well, for now, I will continue my work as a family violence support worker at Norwest Co-op. I absolutely love my job and the workplace. And then I'm also graduating in April from my human rights and conflict resolution studies. So after then, I want to work towards creating new policies and raising awareness and just advocacy for these departments where we lack, so that every Manitoban can say that this is a safe place and everybody has a place that they can call it home, and people don't have to choose between staying in an abusive relationship or living on the street. This should not be the case. People should be able to live a safe place. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're thinking more of going towards the advocacy route rather than the hands-on work?
Yeah, because I'm already doing the hands-on work. I got into the job in May. I'm already doing it, and it was a year contract. So maybe after I complete my graduation, I want to work towards getting it more support.
Yeah. And of course, we're hearing that the shortage of staff for these kind of shelters and this kind of work is especially severe in rural areas. What would you do to try to encourage people to go do this kind of work out there, Abhijot?
So there's many things. Honestly, first of all, it's a calling, and many people are not even aware that what kind of job that they can do, what kind of work that this is. So raising awareness is very important. When people get to know, they want to work. I didn't know this, but when I started this course, I got to know about it, and I wanted to work in family violence because I wanted to address those issues. So it's all about raising awareness. And also, I think it is a very difficult job. So people need to be trained well as well. And this is not something that is, just educational. This is hands-on as well. People need to have that practice, have that confidence, and have those dealing abilities. And all of this is important. And with the population sizes and all those other issues, it is difficult to find shelter support workers in rural areas in the first place. So I think it should be a good paying job with good benefits that can encourage more people.
And speaking of training, Nadine, just before we let you go, if someone's listening out there and wants to know more, where can they get more info on the program?
Well, of course, you can reach out to Red River College and get lots of information on the program. We have representatives from MAWS, Manitoba Association of Women's Shelters, who are also part of the recruiting process. As you mentioned, it is a tuition-free program at this point. So we'd encourage people who, if you have any interest, now would be a good time to take advantage of getting this training and being part of the solution to this problem.
Nadine Powell, an instructor with Red River College's Polytechnic Shelter Support Worker Care course. And we also heard from Abhijot Chauhan, who just completed that course. So we're going to stay talking about this today. And one of the other angles we're looking at is it came out of something Wab Canoe said yesterday on our program. The Premier mentioned Manitoba could go in the direction of wanting to have a designation for intimate partner violence as an epidemic. But what would that mean? Would that just be symbolic? Could that result in some real change? Well, we're going to take you to Ontario this morning. An advocate there says the word epidemic and a bill they have in the works there hold a lot of power. So stay tuned. That conversation's coming up in a bit. Right now, the opioid crisis is the topic of our next interview. Of course, it is hitting every corner of Canada. Also in Ontario this week, the government announced its plan to shut down 10 supervised injection sites by March next year. The move will ban facilities within 200 meters of schools and childcare centres. The Premier of Manitoba said on our program previously that our city's supervised injection site, the one being proposed right now, is planned for somewhere in the area north of Main Street here, and that he said, Wab Canoe said, they will keep schools and daycares in mind when they're choosing a location. Now, the decision in Ontario is part of this ongoing debate about the role of harm reduction alongside treatment and recovery efforts. And Jillian Kola is our next guest. She's a public health researcher at Memorial University. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think of Ontario's decision?
I mean, quite frankly, it was a shocking decision, not at all based on the evidence that we have that supervised consumption sites are a pivotal service that helps to reduce overdose-related mortality amidst, as you mentioned, the really, really devastating toxic drug crisis that's causing overdoses across the country. I think it also makes no sense from the point of view that we know that supervised consumption sites, one of the key things that they do in addition to providing quick intervention if an overdose occurs, They also really provide places for people who use drugs to go to access health and social services that they might not be getting elsewhere. They're also a key place where people go to access referrals to treatment services if they would like to access them. And so this idea that somehow treatment and harm reduction are in opposition to each other, it's a completely false antagonism. I'm so disappointed to see the Ontario government playing up that false antagonism because we need both. Experts across the country very much agree we need evidence-based treatment as well as evidence-based harm reduction if we're going to have any dent whatsoever in this crisis. And taking away supervised consumption sites is going to unfortunately predictably lead to an increase in overdose-related mortality.
What are your thoughts on the location? Because that was the specific part of why Ontario said they were making these decisions to close these specific locations because they were by schools and daycares.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that that's a red herring. And I think it's a red herring for two reasons. The first is that the Ontario government actually commissioned two separate expert reports following an absolutely devastating act of gun violence that occurred in the proximity of one of the sites last summer. Both of their expert reports that they themselves commissioned did not recommend closing the sites. They did not recommend closing sites close to daycares and schools. In fact, we have to recognize that in dense urban neighborhoods, sometimes places like community health centers, which is where most of the supervised injection sites in Ontario are located, they're, multi-purpose facilities that provide a range of health services, including services to people who use drugs. They're in the midst of communities. And so I think that it's important to take into account how do we keep everybody safe, including kids at schools, what security measures need to be in place. Those are important conversations to have, but neither of the reports recommended closing sites close to schools and, in fact, closing any sites whatsoever. They both recommended scaling up sites and funding them better. The second thing is that if the issue was location and not locating them close to schools, well, then let them move. Because what the new legislation that the province is proposing, it says that no sites will be allowed to open anywhere in Ontario, including the sites that they're closing because of this so-called proximity issue. So if the real issue is proximity, then you would just make them move a little bit further away or to a better location, and then that's fine. But they haven't done that. They've said there's going to be no new supervised consumption sites, no ability to apply for decriminalization in any municipality. And worse than that, they're also saying that new places cannot actually provide sterile injection equipment, which is just absolutely doesn't make any sense. It's a HIV prevention intervention.
I want to ask you this, because I heard in the national news this week out of Ontario that when they were coming out with this decision, one of the things that one of the officials said, and this isn't a direct quote, but it is certainly correct in terms of what was said. I'm just paraphrasing. It was said that they were looking at supervised consumption sites and saying that it has not decreased the number of people who are struggling with addiction. But I said, I was thinking to myself, but has it decreased the number of people that have overdosed or deaths? Those two things are different things, and there's distinctions to be made there. Can you talk to us a little bit about, when you hear these conversations, what distinctions aren't being made that you wish would be made?
So that's a really, really good distinction, because we're having a crisis of overdose-related deaths in people who use drugs occasionally, recreationally, who are trying them for the first time, as well as people who are using them more frequently or are dependent on those drugs. And if we only frame this in terms of a crisis of addictions, we unfortunately are going to miss a big part of the puzzle, because these sites are really, really important in connecting with all levels of substance use that are happening. We definitely need better access to low-barrier, evidence-based treatment programs. That is a necessity. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that occurring pretty much anywhere, including in Ontario, where for 6 years, this government has actually been promising increased and better access to treatment. And so I think right now we're actually in a moment of, not actually paying attention to what the evidence is telling us, and sloganeering and electioneering that's very, very sad.
Jillian, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Jillian Cole, Assistant Professor of Population Health and Applied Health Sciences at Memorial University. Fog advisory, keep that in mind on your commute, 788-3093. That's for the Red River Valley. And an air quality advisory for Dauphin and Thompson for the smoke this morning. Your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. At 6:30, it's 15 degrees with a smoky air quality advisory in Thompson, 19 degrees with a fog advisory in downtown Winnipeg. Good morning. I'm Matt Humphrey. Though Ottawa is ordering binding arbitration in the lockout of rail workers in Canada, the question now becomes, how long will it take to get back to normal? Those affected say the dispute needs to be resolved as soon as possible. Sam Sampson explains.
They didn't get any in the city, though.
Scott Jesperson would much rather talk about the rain above the sound of grain pouring from a truck. At least the weather is something he's used to shouldering during harvest. But a lockout halting trains on both major railways, that's a new one.
As farmers, there's going to be a limitation on what we can manage.
Grain from Western Canada usually gets hauled out by rail to ports for international shipping. Though binding arbitration is now coming into effect, the dispute between CN, CP Kansas City, and their union is not over.
We don't want to see it take months. If that happens, then there's definitely going to be a concern. There will be a cash crunch on farms.
Economists say Canada doesn't have the trucks nor truckers it would take to replace trains, never mind the overwhelm on highways. As a major global exporter of agricultural goods, any pause in Canada's supply chain can cause international backlog. An international domino effect other sectors like mining, energy, and manufacturing are also worried about. Now they wait to see if and when things get back on track. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
The John Howard Society of Brandon wants communities to work together to address intimate partner violence. The society is working to encourage those conversations with its Building Healthy Relationships program. Executive Director Ross Robinson says the program can help people have better relationships. The society wants to bring it into more rural communities. Robinson says the recent triple homicide near McCreary shows how the issue needs to be addressed.
We need to get together. The biggest thing that I think that can help is the community. We're keeping an eye on each other, loving each other in a proper fashion, looking out for their health, looking out for their finances, looking out for whatever's going on in their life, and being aware and concerned.
Robinson says organizations like John Howard need to reach out to people, especially men, and build relationships. He says this can help prevent domestic violence. People in Winnipeg's Inuit community say they're happy to call a new space their own. The Tunga Resources Centre has moved into a bigger building on Selkirk Avenue. It offers services to Inuit transitioning to urban life in Winnipeg, like computers and a laundry service. It also has a kitchen to prepare traditional Inuit foods known as country food. Kelly Hicks-McKayak is a grade 12 student. He says the entire community can now gather in just one space.
The biggest, most important thing is that connection, that reconnection, because we all in Nunavut gather together all the time. And now that we're living in Winnipeg, it's a little bit different. We're very separated. I think the second biggest thing is definitely that country food. We need that country food.
The centre plans to start offering a variety of programs next month, from traditional craft workshops to Inuktitut language classes. The head of a women's clinic says she's happy prescription birth control will soon be free across Manitoba, but hopes the province goes one step further. Starting October 1st, the province will cover the full cost of 60 commonly used birth control methods, from IUDs to the pill. Cameron Namard is executive director of the Women's Health Clinic in Winnipeg. She says prescription birth control can be cost prohibitive for a lot of people.
Particularly young people, maybe people who are in domestic abuse situations, people who may be low income, people who are maybe international students, migrant workers, may not have the choices that everybody has. And so it can be really prohibitive.
Namard says birth control can range from being free to costing hundreds of dollars. And while she's overjoyed the province is taking action now, she wishes it would also cover the costs of non-prescription birth control methods, such as condoms and the morning after pill. And finally, in case you missed it, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has accepted the Democratic Party's nomination as its presidential candidate. In a wide-ranging 45-minute speech, Harris also addressed many issues, including the war in Gaza.
Now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost.
Harris says she and President Joe Biden are working on that deal, one that would also recognize the Palestinian people's right to security. And that's your CBC News from Winnipeg.
You know what didn't happen last night, Matt?
What's that?
Well, my girlfriend showed up because I have a huge crush on Pink. Amazing! No Beyonce. Everybody was waiting, right?
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, everybody was waiting.
But she was almost there in spirit.
Yeah, I know, because we heard that Freedom song all week long.
And
right?
we'll continue to.
Yeah, we will. All right, thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
More on international and national politics and what happened down south coming up on World Report at 7. Right now, 6:36 a.m. Let's get into our forecast. We do have a couple of advisories here. So there's some issues out there, mostly with fog, right, Chloe?
Yes, yeah. I got a call from David, actually. Winnipeg is under a fog advisory at the moment. Dense fog developing over the Red River Valley early this morning. David called traveling between Highway 12 and the perimeter. So he's on Highway 213. Very, very foggy out there. He said visibility is around 150 meters. So make sure that you are driving very safely, keeping those fog lights on, and just being aware of who is on the highway along with you. So that fog advisory, it should dissipate later in the morning. So we should see that fog be less of an issue on the commute, but just make sure that you are taking that very seriously out on the roads. We're looking at high of 29 today with the humidex feeling like 35. And then moving to Dauphin and Thompson, an air quality advisory in effect for both of those places. Wildfire smoke expected to cause very poor air quality and reduced visibility today in both places. And a reminder, just during heavy smoke conditions, everyone is at risk regarding of their age or regardless of their age or health. So listen to your body. If you experience symptoms, reduce or stop outdoor activities. In Brandon at the moment, it is, let me scroll, Brandon Airport, clear skies, 11 degrees. Looking at a high of 29 with the humidex feeling like 35. In Dauphin, we are seeing that widespread smoke with misty skies at the moment, 18 degrees. Looking at a high of 25 with the humidex, 30 degrees. And then in Thompson at the moment, it is cloudy, 15 degrees, looking at a high of 21, feeling like 25 with that humidex. And a reminder of those smoky skies for Thompson and Dauphin. Again, if there is anything else going on your commute, if you want to give a fog update, if you're traveling on those highways here in Manitoba, I'd love to hear from you. 204-788-3093.
All right. Thank you very much, Chloe. And in case you're wondering, you want to see this visually, remember we're on YouTube Live. You can check out the shot of downtown Winnipeg and see how foggy it is, as Chloe's been mentioning. All right. Let's get into business news. Phil DeMontis here live now with our business report at 22 minutes to 7. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Marcy.
So Ottawa has, as soon as it's begun, now said back to work. We knew this would happen. It's critical. They've ordered the end-to-work stoppages over at CN and CPKC, and I don't mean the lockout, to be clear here, is critical, and I don't mean the back-to-work's critical. I mean, we were all worried about the grain moving and such. So a one-day lockout. How quickly, though, can things get back to normal?
That's a little unclear. Stephen McKinnon, the federal labor minister, was talking yesterday in terms of days before the trains would be up and running. That's after on Thursday he sent the dispute between CN, CPKC, and their 9,300 conductors and engineers to the Canada Labour Relations Board. That begins the process of binding arbitration and a probable settlement between the two sides. Railways locked out their workers Thursday morning after 9 months of failed negotiations. Talk about the two sides fighting over wages, but really looks to be much more over working conditions, and they couldn't get a deal done in that area. Federal government says, look, we couldn't, exactly for the reason you were pointing out with the grain shipments and other things, couldn't have the work stoppage go on for the potential damage to Canada's economy, roughly $300 million a day on the back of the envelope. But here's why things might not get back to normal right away. Both CN and CPKC said they were opening up their rail yards today, but getting the trains actually up and running will take longer. It took them a while to get them down, so you can't just flip the switch. Teamsters, which represents the employees, could challenge the arbitration order in court. Unions historically have been opposed to binding arbitration settlements. Interestingly, though, I found some studies that said those settlements tend to give workers awards that are a bit higher than they would get in normal contract talks. Two sides also could just ignore the order. Happened in that recent labor dispute over at WestJet. The government ordered binding arbitration, but the union went out on strike anyway. If that happened, the government would have to table back-to-work legislation, but the Liberals' minority situation probably couldn't get that kind of legislation through the House of Commons this time around.
To another story this morning, can you explain to the listeners what ghost jobs are and why they're increasing in number?
Yeah, I hadn't heard of this, and at first I thought ghost jobs were scams, fake postings where ne'er-do-wells would get your personal information. Turns out, no, ghost jobs are for non-existent positions, but they're placed placed by legitimate companies, and there are more of them these days. So in 2019, for every 10 job postings, 8 people got hired. By 2024, that figure dropped to 4 out of 10. That means if you're applying for a job today, there's a 60% chance you'll get turned down, regardless of your qualifications. Now, some of these are legitimate, but experts say companies are posting for non-existent positions for a few reasons. One, they might have a legitimate need, but not the budget at a particular time for, computer programmer. So we'll post it, collect some resumes, and then when we get the okay to hire, we have those people up and running. They also, if they have a company that might be in some kind of doldrums, you post a lot of positions, just like you're hiring people. Things are happening. Another reason, though, you might just collect a pool of talent for undefined work. Think of a college that's recruiting for a sports team. You might have your first choice, but you might need the second and third if the big dog doesn't come. This phenomenon is growing, and it causes problems that are twofold. Obviously, prospective workers get their hopes up for a new job when that position really wasn't on the table in the first place. But also, it's harder for economists to see the true state of the job market. You look at these job openings and you say, gee, they're way up, so companies are really doing things, when in fact maybe half the positions are real positions, the other half are just kind of fake things that they're accumulating information on.
And finally, before we look at the markets this morning, a Canadian company has discovered the world's largest diamond in more than a century. And so what comes next? What do you do with a huge diamond?
I guess you cut them up into smaller diamonds. I don't know. I mean, Vancouver's Lucara Mining discovered the biggest diamond anyone's found since 1905 in the southern African country of Botswana. 2,500 carats, enough for 1,700 decent-sized wedding rings, because I looked that up. The monster gem weighs almost about half a kilogram, and Botswana's president, Masisi, showed off the diamond at a press conference on Thursday with the one word, wow. Lucara says it's too early to value the gem, but a smaller one at the same mine in 2016 sold for $63 million US. As to what you do with something that big, it appears you cut them up into something smaller. Largest diamond ever discovered was in South Africa in 1905, the Cullinan diamond. It was cut up into smaller pieces and used in the British crown jewels. So, I've seen this where you get these really prominent diamonds, but yeah, you cut them down into something and somebody buys them as an emerald ring kind of idea.
I'm of an age where I'm thinking about Peter Sellers and the Pink Panther.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's that kind of idea.
My husband also might be obsessed with that movie. All right, let's go on in the markets.
That's a different story. Europe, positive right now. The UK up 1%. Germany, France in the black as well. Worries that Japan's inflation rate might be too low, and that was a problem in the 90s for a whole decade. Nikkei in Japan, though, was up. Hong Kong down slightly. Oil up 93 cents, $73, 94 cents a barrel. Gold's up $19, $2,536 an ounce. Finally, the Canadian dollar up marginally, 73.58 cents U.S.
All right, Phil, have a great weekend. Thank you.
Same to you, Marcy.
That is Phil DeMont with our business news on CBC. 6:44 a.m. is the time right now. Fog, 19 degrees, an advisory across the Red River Valley. And it's the real stuff. It's not a light fog. So I suspect if you're driving, you're going to want to take it easy out there. Just put those lights on, pay attention. Brandon's clear, however, 13 degrees. And Thompson's cloudy and 15. So we've got kind of a mixed bag here. Winnipeg going to be hot and sticky again, a high of 29 with Humidex 35. Well, speaking of old school movies, our next guest credits this movie with kickstarting one of his favorite hobbies.
Close eye. Trust. Concentrate. Think only tree. Make a perfect picture down to last pine needle. Wipe your mind clean, everything but tree. Nothing exists, whole world. Only tree.
Only tree, people. That's a clip from the 1984 film Karate Kid. Who doesn't know that? Mr. Miyagi teaching Daniel meditation through bonsai. Ever since he saw the film, my next guest, as I mentioned, Scott Sampson, has been enamored by tiny trees. He's the president of the Bonsai Society of Winnipeg. The group has been steadily growing in numbers over the past few years. This weekend, they're going to be coming together to show off their hard work. And this is where I tell you to please watch YouTube this morning and just click on there because you want to see the hard work that he's brought in studio. There's a couple of trees here. Hi there, Scott. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thanks.
Did you enjoy hearing Little Karate Kid?
That was great. Danielson.
It was also one of my favorite movies. I had a poster of Ralph Macchio in my room.
As did many, I'm sure.
For years.
Yeah.
I cannot bonsai like this, though. Just why don't you describe? Let's just get right in. What have you brought in for us today?
So I brought in for you a good example. There's two trees in front of us, and one of them is a little bit more refined, and the other one is kind of just on the verge of starting its bonsai journey. The first one's a tropical tree. So what we do in the club is try and help people learn how to grow bonsai in Winnipeg with our harsh climate. Because, I mean, let's face it, we don't live in Florida. So we've got kind of 3-4 months of solid growing every year, and then we've got to figure out what to do with these trees for the winter.
So this one's the tropical tree in front of you? Just maybe point for the viewers.
Absolutely. This is a tropical tree. It's a ficus.
Great.
So in the winter, this tree can't take our cold temperatures, so it comes in the house with me and goes under grow lights. So that's one kind of technique that we use to winter our trees. The second tree, the taller one, is a tamarack, and that's just, as I said, starting its bonsai journey. So it's very young, and I mean, it's an older tree. It's probably 75 years old, but the tree itself has only been a bonsai for kind of 2 or 3 years.
It's probably 75 years old. Where did you get it?
So we collect these trees in places where it's legal to do so.
Yes.
So provincial trunk highways and places like that where you can go and collect plants. But this tree came from a bog where the growth is very stunted, and I mean, tamarack doesn't really necessarily like to be sitting in water, but they're hardy enough that they grow there, and all the other trees can't. So, in a bog or something similar like that, very swamp-like conditions, there are lots of tamarack, but their growth is very stunted. They grow very little every year. So it's a good kind of place for us to get very old trees that that aren't 30 feet tall.
Now, I'll come back to the specimens, how they're planted, and describe for the radio listeners as well, sort of the shape of them and how you do this. But I want to ask you a little bit about your hobby.
Yes.
So when we're watching the scene in Karate Kid, take us back to young little Scott. What were you thinking? What is it that got you hooked?
You know what? I've always been fascinated with miniatures. My brother had a train set growing up, and I just love the little buildings and the little people, and I've always kind of, I'm an artist, so I always drew things, and I love drawing little tiny versions of things. So seeing the Karate Kid and seeing these little fascinating trees, to me already, I got the idea that they kind of represented a massive tree that you'd see off in the distance, but they were tiny, and you could, potentially have them in your living room. Now, that's not where these trees should be, but right away it fascinated me.
And so what was your first bonsai?
Well, fast forward, 20 years, and I've got kids, and I've stopped playing sports because I'm getting old and my joints are, not what they used to be, kind of thing. So
I feel that. Yeah.
There you go. So looking at hobbies, and my brother had kind of connected with the Bonsai Society at the time, and I had, bought a couple of small plants that I was kind of reading about what the techniques were to kind of minimize the size of
and
things.
And what kind were they? Your first ones?
Well, I would say probably the first one would have been something like this, a tropical, a ficus, because, it was something I wanted to keep in the house.
And just so people know, when we're going with this story, like a ficus is, you can find those even like at the grocery store or wherever,
Sure.
like they're just little pretty common trees with small green leaves.
Yep.
And they often, they have tons and tons of branches. So you started with something like that you started with?
Something similar, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why? Are they forgiving when you're snipping, or why are they good beginner plants?
You know what? The whole thing is you're trying to create the illusion of a massive tree, but in very small form. So, there's certain species that work a lot better. So the smaller the leaves, obviously, the easier technique you're going to have, or the easier time you're going to have creating that illusion of a giant tree. So something like a Manitoba maple that has, tree leaves that are as big as my palm is going to be a lot more difficult to create the illusion than something like a ficus that, you can get the leaves to be half an inch in size.
Got it. How many bonsais do you have now?
I've reduced my collection
Okay.
just to make it a little bit more manageable. So I'm down to about 50 trees.
50 of them.
Yes.
That's a ton of work.
Well, it is, but having said that, not all of them are finished bonsai. I'd say I have maybe 10 that I would consider close to the end of their, journey as the style that I want them to be in. And the rest of them are all somewhere along the lines of, on their way there. So
What do you feel like when you're doing your hobby, when you're snipping, when you're creating, shaping, and in your head, you're going somewhere, it's going to take years. These are live plants that need to be cared for, these trees rather. What do you feel like when you're doing it?
So that's the other thing that happens is as you start out, what I think of as a bonsai now is completely different than what I thought of as a bonsai, what I wanted in my collection when I first started. You learn a lot as you go along, and you kind of make lots of mistakes. I probably killed more trees than anybody else in our society, but that's kind of one of the ways that you learn. There's a bit of a connection that it's an art form that's never really finished because even if you get something to the level where you're very happy with the way it looks, the tree is also responding and growing, and you kind of have to. It's never quite finished because the tree does keep adjusting itself, and you have to keep it in line.
The way that you've presented these specimens is beautiful. So now I'm back to describing these here, and I love this because on YouTube you almost look like you're hiding behind one of them. Your face is covered by the tree. Okay, so we've got long, tall sort of pedestals. They're gorgeous. They're like a deep sort of dark wood, and then you've got these shallow pottery dishes covered in moss at the bottom. The one in front of me, this specimen has a big curved root, and it's wired to be shaped that way. And then, as you said, the top is just beautifully bonsai'd, so it's sparse, and yet the shape is clear, and it's almost flowing over. Now, I'm leaning over to look at the other one because your other design, there's two pots. One of them is a pot with a tree and moss, and then it's kind of got that, this is the ficus now, it's got that nubby, thick, sort of stumpy looking root that comes out trunk, and it bends over. And it's almost leaning over to relate to something sitting underneath it, which is a tiny little pottery shallow pot with moss and a big rock. What's the relationship or the story that you have on display there?
So in a traditional bonsai display, you might have a companion plant or something else that kind of tells the story of the bonsai. And in Japan, a companion plant is a common thing that would be displayed alongside a tree. And generally what that would be is something that was collected on the site where the tree was collected, and the family kind of cherishes that little plant as a reminder of where the tree came from. So in this case, what I've got is that the tree is a style, it's called a cascade, which sort of represents what a tree would look like growing out of the side of a cliff face or a rock or in the mountains.
Yep.
So to kind of continue on with that story, the companion I've decided for with this is a little, another Japanese artist called suiseki, which is a viewing stone, or in a rough translation is a water stone. So the stone that I've got here in the little pot kind of relays a mountainscape in a miniature form. So it kind of gives you the whole story. You see the tree kind of get the idea that maybe
Cascading
it's growing
down.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'd see a miniature version of the landscape it came from.
They're just so peaceful to be around. I love bonsai. All right, let's get to the nuts and bolts of this. You said don't put them in your living room. You said you do overwinter them.
Yes.
So what's possible in Manitoba when it comes to bonsai, and what are the mistakes that you'd like people to stop making?
Well, so the biggest mistake is thinking that it's a house plant. And I guess in some ways you can kind of make them a house plant. The problem is that you're trying to keep them miniature. And if you have a plant inside, it's constantly going to be reaching for the sun. Even through, our North American windows, they're, kind of 3 panes, and they actually cut out quite a lot of light. The human eye is amazing, so it doesn't look like it's actually reducing the amount of light, but there's very little light actually coming through that window. So the trees stretch and reach constantly to get to the light, and that's kind of goes against what we're trying to do, is keep all of the branches short and the leaves small. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that you have to kind of think about where the tree grows in nature, and then kind of utilize that as to how you take care of the tree. So again, this ficus comes indoors with me, goes under strong grow lights all winter long so that it can get what it needs through the winter. The tamarack, or our local species that we dig up locally, have to go into dormancy every winter, just like the trees around us, so that those trees all get buried in the corner of my yard in a snowbank for 6 months of the year. So
Do you have like a little bonsai overwintering?
they do, yeah.
Spot.
So they all
if you've
go
got
in.
50, you must.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, this weekend, we can't run out of time here.
Okay.
So the event this weekend, the Bonsai Society of Winnipeg. First of all, how many people are part of it?
So we've got now, I think, just about 130 members.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what are they going to be showing off this weekend? What can people expect?
So it's a good place to come and learn about bonsai and learn about the kind of the techniques and what it takes to grow bonsai, because we can encourage everybody in our membership to show something they're working on. So you'll see trees that have been in styling for 25, 30 years from, the guys that have been in the club for a long time. But you're also going to see trees that have just started their bonsai journey. They've just been kind of dug up out of the ground, and somebody's maybe put the first couple of wires on them and pruned them a little bit. And those people would be, new members, so they can explain to you a little bit about what got them into bonsai and what they've learned so far and how they're,
Beautiful.
kind of progressing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for making the effort to bring these specimens in. What's your, just last quick question, what's the oldest tree in your collection?
I'd say the oldest tree in my collection is a tamarack. It's about 120 years old, I estimate. And the reason I kind of know that is because I dug up two at the same time. The other one perished, and I did cut the cross section and count the rings, and it was probably 130 years old. It was about the same size. So.
Gorgeous. What a lovely thing to have in a studio on a Friday morning when it's foggy and gray outside, a little bit of greenery. Scott, have a wonderful event this weekend.
Thank you very much.
That is Scott Sampson. He's president of the Bonsai Society of Winnipeg. So their annual bonsai display is Saturday and Sunday, tomorrow and Sunday. It's at Norwood Community Centre. Entry is free. You can find all the details at bonsaiwinnipeg.ca.
My heart is a ghost, and he drinks and he smokes and he keeps me awake. All through the night my heart shakes. So I live alone, drink beer by the phone, and it keeps me alive. I know there is hope, but I can't look for it. There are leaves in the trees, there are trees in the forest. There are leaves in the trees, there are trees in the forest.
Well, you know why we played that after that interview, right? Doesn't take somebody very deep thought. Can't go wrong with little leaves and the trees and the trees in the forest. The tune is called Leaves, Trees, Forest, and it's from Dan Mangan, if you want to check it out, celebrating Canadian artists. 3 minutes to 7 o'clock on 89.3 FM, 990 AM or on the app. Matt Humphrey is back in to talk about the news this morning.
Good morning. In Winnipeg, the Tungasugit Resources Centre has moved into a larger location on Selkirk Avenue. The centre offers supports for Inuit transitioning to urban life. Next month, it'll start offering a variety of programs, from craft workshops to Inuktitut language classes. We'll hear more about that. And CBC News is studying data from libraries across the country. The data show security incidents in libraries, like aggressive behavior, verbal threats, or suspected overdoses, are on the rise. Library workers say they are not equipped to manage the influx of vulnerable patrons who are seeking help. You can read more about that at cbc.ca/Manitoba. I'll have more news after World Report.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
We have a fog advisory for the Red River Valley. Fog certainly present here in Winnipeg, especially downtown. 19 degrees currently, a high of 29 with humidex 35. There's also an air quality statement around the smoke issued for Dauphin and Thompson. On the drive this morning, walk or roll on the commute, if you want to reach us, 788-3093. So far, we haven't heard of any major incidents. But please update that if that changes. In the next hour of the show, it sounds like a great deal. Spend $1 and get $250 back. A new report says Manitoba fishers could see that kind of return if they become eco-certified. We're going to talk about that and why it's something that some advocates are saying fishers should be looking into. In addition, we're going to talk to a Manitoba gardener who's been growing the seeds of Ukrainian history, so we'll hear more about that. And at 10 to 8 this morning, if you want your kids outside enjoying the rest of what summer has to offer, it might be as easy as letting them take a few more risks when they play. We're going to talk more about risky play and how it can benefit your kids. This is part of a series of conversations we've had on the show this week. Today we're going to turn our attention as well into how you design playgrounds to have more risk involved and what that looks like. So stay tuned. Right now, the World Report, it's 1 minute to 7 o'clock on CBC. I'm Marcy Marcusa. You're on 89.3 FM.
Today on The Current.
We want to make sure that toxic drugs are not killing people. And in this case, we're going to see a lot more death.
I'm Connie Walker. Ontario is the latest province to put strict limits on safe consumption sites, as it and other parts of the country push to add more treatment centres. How best to help Canadians facing addiction. Coming up on The Current.
The Current. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm John Northcott. It was a fiery call to action. The finale to the Democratic National Convention saw Kamala Harris outlining her vision for America late last night. She made her high-profile pitch to voters as she formally accepted her party's nomination, becoming the Democratic presidential nominee. CBC's Katie Simpson reports from the convention in Chicago.
It felt electric inside the United Center. Thousands of Democrats dancing and cheering to mark this moment in history. In accepting the Democratic presidential nomination, Kamala Harris is now the first woman of color to lead a party's ticket.
I promise to be a president for all Americans.
Harris made a plea for unity, arguing that in this election, Americans have the opportunity to defeat the politics of anger and division. Harris and Democrats are trying to walk a careful line to not insult the people who don't agree with their politics while still attacking their Republican opponents.
Imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States.
Harris painted Donald Trump as dangerous to democracy, contrasting his attempt to steal the 2020 election and promises to free January 6th rioters from jail to that of her life's work as a prosecutor and California Attorney General, arguing that experience makes her the person to fight for freedom, as she says, vowing to restore reproductive rights, protect LGBTQ rights, and voting rights.
And together, let us write the next great chapter.
Red, white, and blue balloons fell to the convention floor as she embraced her husband and thanked the crowd. Her job gets harder as she takes her campaign on the road to try to convince Americans who may not agree with her to give her a shot. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Chicago.
In this country, now that binding arbitration is being imposed on the rail contract disputes, the Teamsters Union is taking down picket lines at CN Rail, and those workers will be back on the job today. But it's not the case at Canadian Pacific Kansas City. Let's go to Janice McGregor in our Parliamentary Bureau. Janice, the union and CPKC are meeting with Labour Relations Board in a few hours. What are we expecting from that meeting?
John, this story is shifting from what the Teamsters called an employer-driven lockout to a really uncertain situation. Workers have not returned to that railway this morning. The Teamsters had given strike notice at that employer. So as negotiators for both sides resumed talks with the Industrial Relations Board this morning, the question here is, what happens if the union is not prepared to accept binding arbitration? Or more specifically, do they have the legal right not to? And therefore, could we see the Teamsters remain on the picket lines in what would now be a strike? Proponents of the union's perspective that it was inappropriate of the federal government to interfere in these negotiations point to a 2015 Supreme Court ruling that found that the right to freedom of association in Canada's charter includes workers' right to strike if collective bargaining breaks down. In other words, can the federal government move to end a lockout, which is what yesterday was, but not necessarily a strike? It's not a given that the Industrial Relations Board will order an end to the stoppage at CPKC.
So, Janice, imposing binding arbitration, a rare step by the federal government. Take us through the political reaction to that.
New Democrats have backed the Teamsters' position that the Labour minister's intervention amounts to giving the rail companies what they wanted in this dispute, notwithstanding the fact that the minister didn't send this for a binding arbitration until 9 months of talks had failed and the country was facing a nationwide rail transportation crisis that could have cost the economy billions. The supply and confidence agreement with the NDP doesn't require the Liberals to necessarily side with the union in every labour dispute, but being seen as not doing so here now lets New Democrats paint the Liberals as doing the bidding of corporate Canada at the expense of unionised workers.
Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Thanks, Janice.
You're welcome.
Meanwhile, Canadian industries are worried about how long it will take for rail service to return to normal and how much it will affect their bottom lines. Sam Sampson has that part of the story.
Not going to combine today. They didn't get any in the city, though.
Scott Jesperson would much rather talk about the rain above the sound of grain pouring from a truck. At least the weather is something he's used to shouldering during harvest, but a lockout halting trains on both major railways, that's a new one.
As farmers, we're used to, interruptions. We're used to, weather concerns, market concerns. I mean, we're pretty resilient that way. There's going to be a limitation on what we can manage.
Grain from Western Canada usually gets hauled out by rail to ports for international shipping. The uncertainty about what happens next and when could result in delayed payments for farmers.
We're hoping that they can negotiate some sort of a settlement, but we don't want to see it take months. If that happens, then there's definitely going to be a concern. There will be a cash crunch on farms, for sure.
Economists say Canada doesn't have the trucks nor truckers it would take to replace trains, never mind the overwhelm on highways. As a major global exporter of agricultural goods, any pause in Canada's supply chain can cause international backlog, something that weighs on homegrown farmers like Southern Ontario's Chris Burkholder.
The world needs us badly. Every time we kind of bung up the pipeline, so to speak, it throws a wrench into that. So the world needs our food.
An international domino effect other sectors like mining, energy, and manufacturing are also worried about. Now they wait to see if and when things get back on track. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
Lawyers for Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Leach are expected to wrap up final submissions today before the prosecution has its final say. It's the sixth day of closing arguments in the criminal trial for Leach and fellow organizer Chris Barber. The pair are accused of mischief, intimidation, and counseling others to commit crimes during the huge protest in downtown Ottawa that lasted for weeks in 2022. Narendra Modi is in Kyiv for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. India's leader is positioning himself as a possible broker for peace in the region. As Julia Chapman reports, that's despite India maintaining close ties with Moscow ever since Russia invaded Ukraine.
यूक्रेन और पश्चिम एशिया में चल रहे संघर्ष
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying to strike a balance. He's long pushed for diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine. At the same time, India has benefited from cut-price Russian oil and remains a major buyer of Russian weapons. India is known for what it calls non-alignment, a policy of neutrality its critics describe as opportunism.
This is part of India trying to project its rising status.
Bhavna Dave is from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London.
Eventually, this had to take place, and especially given the global status that India is projecting, India could not have just remained aligned or talking to Russia and not being engaged with Ukraine.
Mr. Modi was in Moscow just a few weeks ago. While he was there, bombs fell on a children's hospital in Kyiv on one of the bloodiest days of the war. That same day, Modi shared a hug with President Vladimir Putin, which President Volodymyr Zelensky called a devastating blow to peace efforts. Traveling to Kyiv suggests Mr. Modi is willing to listen to both sides. Officials in Kyiv are hopeful that he can exert pressure on Moscow, but Ukraine is unlikely to convince India to distance itself from Russia completely. Julia Chapman, CBC News, London.
Meanwhile, Russia says a Ukrainian drone tried to attack the Kursk nuclear power station overnight. The news agency TASS says the drone was shot down near a spent nuclear fuel storage facility. The Foreign Ministry calls the attack an act of nuclear terrorism and is demanding a swift response from the United Nations nuclear watchdog. Ukraine has not responded to the allegation. The incident occurred just days before the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency is due to visit the site. Italy's Coast Guard says the last missing body from the sunken super yacht has been found. Divers have been scouring the wreckage off the coast of Sicily since Monday when the ship was hit by a severe storm and capsized. 7 people died in the mishap. 15 others were rescued. 18-year-old Hannah Lynch, the daughter of British tech tycoon Mike Lynch, is believed to be the last person the divers were looking for. And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. You can listen to us live every morning on the CBC News app. Just tap on the local icon. And remember, for news anytime, you can go to our website, cbcnews.ca, including plenty more on the DNC conference as it wraps up and the U.S. election for president goes into high gear. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
Well, what a foggy morning we've got out there, Manitoba. I'm Marcy Marcusa. There's an advisory, in fact, for the Red River Valley. It's pretty foggy in downtown Winnipeg as well. Thanks for joining us. You're on CBC. This is Information Radio, 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube this morning, where you're seeing that shot of those foggy conditions today. Full weather forecast in just a moment. This hour on the program, we have had a series of conversations this week all about risky play and the benefits of risky play for your kids. But how do you design more engaging spaces for kids in terms of your neighborhoods or our cities? What do those risky quote-unquote playgrounds look like? So we'll continue that with that conversation at 10 to 8 this morning. In addition, carrying on cultural tradition through tending to a garden. We're going to visit a rural home in Manitoba where varieties of Ukrainian plants have been thriving for decades, and they have been brought over here to grow the seeds of Ukrainian history. We will begin, though, with a new report that says Manitoba fisheries could be missing out on big bucks. And so we're going to hear what that means and how and why fisheries may want to consider becoming eco-certified. So that interview's in a moment. Right now, though, Matt Humphrey is in with headlines on other stories.
Good morning. The federal labor minister says freight traffic on Canada's 2 largest rail networks could resume within days. The 2 labor disputes are being sent to binding arbitration now. Yesterday, CN Rail and CPKC locked out more than 9,000 employees, but less than 17 hours later, the Labour Minister stepped in and referred the dispute to the Canada Industrial Relations Board for a solution. We'll hear more about that. And the Women's Resource Centre in Brandon is tackling intimate partner violence. They say recent homicides in McCreary and Carman earlier show how dangerous domestic violence can be. So they're launching a year-long research project on women and gender equity, visiting rural communities to examine the ongoing crisis. More news at the bottom of the hour.
Thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
Chloe Friesen's in next to tell us more about the forecast.
Hello. Yeah, this is forecast and commute all in one. We've got a lot of fog-covered areas. We're actually under a fog advisory here in the city of Winnipeg. Many parts of the city experiencing very heavy fog conditions. Visibility may be reduced, so drive to conditions, reduce speed if needed, make sure those lights are on. As well, just outside of the city, we heard from David, who was between Highway 12 and the perimeter. Lots of fog out there, visibility around 150 meters ahead. So make sure you are extra careful on those highways as well. In Brandon, at the moment, mainly sunny. Just kidding. That's coming up in Brandon. We're looking at mainly sunny skies in the forecast.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. But right now, actually in Brandon, it is sunny, 12 degrees. A high of 29 later in the day with the humidex feeling more like 35. We have air quality advisories in effect for both Dauphin and Thompson. That is due to wildfire smoke causing very poor air quality and reduced visibility. So if you are experiencing symptoms, make sure you reduce or stop outdoor activities. In Dauphin today, misty skies, 17 degrees, widespread smoke, a high of 25, feeling like 30 with the humidity. In Thompson today, we are looking at widespread smoke, as I mentioned as well. It's currently cloudy, 15 degrees, a high of 21, forecasted for Thompson, and with the humidex feeling like 25. Here in Winnipeg at the Forks, 19 degrees, looking at foggy skies, of course, here in Winnipeg. If there's anything on the commute that's getting in your way, or you want to give us an update on how that fog is looking out there, 204-788-3093.
Well, as I mentioned, a new report from the Winnipeg-based International Institute for Sustainable Development says that there is big money in EATO certification, and they want to see more Manitoba fisheries consider becoming eco-certified. Currently, only 2 local fisheries are eco-certified, one on Waterhen and Cedar Lakes in northern Manitoba. The IISD says major brands like Walmart USA and Sam's Club have already stopped selling Manitoba fish, and that is because of the lack of certifications in our province. And we could lose more business if demand for certification goes up. Emily Croft is the author of this report. She's also a youth engagement and water policy officer with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And Emily's in studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what does it mean, just sort of if we take a step back and understand this, what does it actually mean to be eco-certified?
Great question. So what it comes down to is consumers are really interested in making sure that the food they eat is sustainable, but most of us don't really understand how it's produced or what sustainability means for that. So eco-certification is when a third-party organization makes up standards that say this is what it means to be sustainable. And then if a company that produces a product meets all of those standards, they get to put a sticker on their product so that when I'm shopping at the store, I can see exactly what's a sustainable product.
I think CBC News, I know CBC News recently did some stories about the other end of this, where you are the consumer in the store and you're looking for things you're looking for that sticker. What is the impact of becoming certified?
So the impact of becoming certified is more of an impact for the seller than for the buyer in this case, because consumers are starting to demand more and more to see these eco-certification labels on the products. So if you're someone who is a producer or a seller of a food product and you don't have that label, it would mean that people might stop buying your product. And we have seen that happen a little bit with Manitoba fish.
And that's what I was alluding to in terms of the states not taking some of the products?
Yes.
Yeah. Why aren't more Manitoba fisheries certified in your view?
I think there is quite a bit of interest right now because we have what you would call an artisanal fishing industry. These aren't extremely wealthy fisheries, so there is a need for government support, especially financially. And right now there's not enough financial resources for every single interested fishery to all get certified at once. So that's the biggest barrier right now.
Why would they need government support to get certified?
So many people don't realize it's actually an expensive process. This isn't just something that you can sign up and have someone come in and check you out for free. It can be anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars.
What's the financial case for considering being eco-certified then? If you look at the numbers, you have some numbers in your report, I know.
Yeah, so the financial case is that, unfortunately, if you don't get eco-certified, you risk losing the markets that you already have. So it's something that you have to do to hold on to the business you have and also potentially to get some new business. So I think the numbers that you're alluding to in the report is that for larger lakes in Manitoba, in order to keep $250 of business long term, they would have to basically spend $1 to get eco-certified to keep the $250 that they're used to having.
Got it. How long can the process take to get eco-certified?
It can be a lengthy process. So the first step, even before the certification, is called pre-certification, and that can take up to 18 months, and that's just assessing where the fishery already is in terms of sustainability. But then there's also the full certification, which can be another year to 18 months. And then the certification lasts 5 years before they would have to recertify.
And the full cost of being certified, can we estimate that? It obviously depends on the size of your fishery, but what's the average?
So the average would be a bit different for a smaller or larger lake, and I need to preface that it really is different in every single case. But what we calculated for Manitoba is that for a smaller lake, we could estimate in the tens of thousands, so maybe between $80,000 and $90,000 in cost. But if it was a big lake, like for example, Lake Winnipeg, it's much higher and even could exceed $250,000.
So now we know why we're talking about government funding to subsidize if we do make this a priority or believe this is a value to have more fisheries certified.
Exactly.
2 Manitoba fisheries I mentioned are currently Marine Stewardship Council certified. So they are on Waterhen and Cedar Lakes in northern Manitoba. Do we know, or what do we know about the impacts of certification and what that's done there?
Yeah, so actually one really cool story from the Cedar Lake certification is they ended up getting a lot of press attention when they got certified because they're also part of a local initiative called Fish Forward that's been really active on eco-certification. And because of that attention, they ended up getting contacted by a pet food company that was willing to pay for eco-certified product that's normally a discarded part of the fish. So it's normally something you'd throw away, but now they're turning a profit on that because they got eco-certified.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So it was a product that, like you said, otherwise would have been unusable, and now it's making profit.
Exactly.
Yeah. What do you hear from people who make a living with Manitoba's commercial fisheries about around this issue?
So what I've heard, I wouldn't say that there's a huge amount of excitement about doing it, but there is an understanding that there's a risk of losing markets.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the fishermen that I've spoken to on this feel that they want to do it because they want to keep their business. But it's more from a perspective of wanting to keep the business flowing.
What about those who, I'm wondering if you hear concerns from fisheries that feel certification, or worry rather that certification could put up more barriers to catching fish and actually make it harder to make a living?
So I think that there's some fear of that for sure, but what we actually found looking at a lot of case studies is that the opposite tends to happen when they eco-certify. Because what eco-certification does is provides a really clear framework so that eco-certified fisheries have more sustainable and predictable revenue over longer periods of time.
I didn't find this in your report, so I'm not sure if you have this information, but I'm wondering how we compare to places like that have more robust commercial, like just because of the nature of where they are fisheries, like in BC and such. Is their rate of eco-certification or in other provinces outside of Manitoba very much higher, or is this sort of a push that in your view should be happening across the country?
Well, in the world, there are very few examples of freshwater fisheries being certified at all. In Canada, there's only one example outside of Manitoba, and that's Lake Erie in Ontario. And they are a more profitable fishery, so they were able to self-fund it without the government assistance. But what's neat here is that if we were able to eco-certify all of the interested Manitoba fisheries, that would make Manitoba home to the highest concentration of certified freshwater fisheries on Earth.
Thanks for coming in, Emily. Is there anything I missed out of the report that you wanted to mention that's important for listeners to hear?
No, I think you got it. Thank you.
We've covered it. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
That's Emily Croft, who's been in with us live in our Friday morning show. She's with the International Institute for Sustainable Development.
Our community. Those who shape this place come from all walks of life. Some of us you hear every day.
And others are working hard to make Manitoba a better place.
The movers and shakers.
The change makers. The people making a difference.
And CBC Manitoba is where you'll hear their stories.
CBC Winnipeg News at 6.
Information radio. Up to speed.
Radio News. CBC.ca/Manitoba.
Watch, listen, experience Manitoba.
It is 7:22 a.m. now on 89.3 FM, 990 a.m. on the app or on YouTube, and 19 and foggy in the city of Winnipeg. Well, let's talk about the Paralympics. Ryan Roussell's Paralympic training does not take place in a gym. The Saskatoon-based athlete trains in an old church in the small town of Asquith, Saskatchewan, population 603. And as we highlight the Paralympians across Canada this week and next week, CBC's Teresa Kleem recently stopped by one of his training sessions. She found 2 parafencers and they were sitting in their wheelchairs fixed in place. They are about 2 meters apart. That's the placement. And they were preparing for an intense duel.
I'm Ryan Roussell. I'm 26 and I compete in parafencing. The mental and physical challenge of it is really engaging. It's kind of like playing chess in real life. If it makes any sense, like you have like a set strategy, you know what you like doing, and then you kind of like analyze your opponent as you're fencing them, figuring out what they like to do, and then kind of counteracting their strategy to your strategy. When I first tried it, I was really, really excited by it, and I said, Mom, I gotta try this, right? Like this is something I gotta do.
My name is Douglas Brecht. I'm the head coach of the Asquith Fencing Club. I founded the club here back in 1990 and have been running it ever since. We used to run demo classes in the gym classes at the school. Made arrangements with the teacher there for us to come in and give the students an opportunity to experience the sport of fencing. And I first encountered Ryan when he was about 6 or 7 years old in this young age group. And then he showed up at the club. And he dragged some of his friends along with him because they weren't as enthusiastic as he was. As you understand, Ryan was in a peer group, basically, of students from his class and their siblings a year older or younger. And so, as with all teenage males, they don't want to be any different than anybody else. And so he was determined that he was going to be an able-bodied fencer. And so he fenced able-bodied. Unfortunately, Ryan has a disability, and he has one leg that's actually 3 inches shorter than the other. And he loves saber fencing, and saber fencing is very much mobility based when you're an able-bodied saber fencer. When he was about 17 or 18, we attempted to convince him to do parafencing, but of course he's still in that teenage mindset. He won't do it because he's not going to be any different than anybody else. What really convinced him was when his opponent finished, undid the seatbelt on his chair, did a handstand, and walked across the gym on his hands. Ryan says, "These guys are hardcore."
I'd say I'm a more intelligent fencer now than I was back then. I've learned a lot since my last Paralympics, what to expect from the top in the world now. Prior to the last Olympics, I wasn't in the same position I am now. I was a lot lower in the ranking and not really sure what I was really doing. Now in this Paralympics, I feel like I'm fine-tuned enough to be standing here and be toe-to-toe with everybody there and have a good chance of actually winning a medal this time around. That's my goal. I can easily do it, I think. Everybody there I know I can beat.
Saskatchewan's Ryan Roussel getting ready for the Paralympics in Paris next week. Thanks to Teresa Clean for that story. The Paralympic Games, by the way, running from August 28th to September 8th with special coverage on CBC and the CBC Gem app as well. I want to mention in Manitoba, we have athletes going to compete who will be competing in para-triathlon as well as in wheelchair basketball. And then we've got coaches heading there for basketball as well to Paris. And some of the officials from Manitoba will be also participating in table tennis. We have officials going and support staff around the sports of wheelchair basketball and weightlifting as well. So we'll be highlighting some of their local Manitoba stories as they get ready for the Paralympic Games coming up in the next couple of weeks. It is 7:26 a.m. and speaking of morning sports, we have filling in for Scott Regehr, Paul McGowan with us again this morning. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Marcy.
So it is not even September yet, but we should start in the NHL, I think, this morning because the Jets made a trade yesterday people are buzzing about.
Yeah, they send first-round pick Rutger McGroarty to the Pittsburgh Penguins for another first round and Braden Yager. A trade most fans probably expected to happen at some point. Rumors started late in the season that McGroarty didn't intend to sign with the Jets. Now, a couple of his teammates at the University of Michigan were offered NHL contracts and NHL playing time. McGroarty was reportedly offered a deal with the Jets, but with Winnipeg in the middle of a playoff push, there was no guarantee of playing time. So instead, the Nebraska native announced his return to the NCAA for next season. GM Kevin Cheveldayoff was asked about the timeline of events.
Got a text from his agent, wanted to meet, so we sat down and chatted, and he informed us that Rutger didn't intend to sign. I went through a litany of questions to see, was it player development? Was it that we didn't burn a year? He says, no. And I met with Rutger face to face. That was the same response as well. He said that when he got to development camp here, he put the jersey on, became real, and it just didn't feel right at that time. And if there's a specific reason, Rutger hasn't told us.
As it turns out, McGroarty won't be returning to the University of Michigan, signed a contract with Pittsburgh hours after the deal was announced. And for those wondering, the Pens visit Winnipeg on October 20th. Let's
go to the CFL. The Blue Bombers are in a position right now that maybe a few fans imagined, or I should say few fans imagined that they might be in, but here we are.
Well, yeah, they still have a shot at first place in the West. They had those back-to-back wins against the Lions. You have the Riders starting to falter. And the Bombers now back in a playoff position. And a win tonight against a struggling Tiger Cats team would put them just 1 point back of the division lead. It means that the upcoming Labor Day Classic suddenly has serious playoff implications. That, of course, depending on how tonight's game ends. Now, if you look at the stats, Hamilton has given up the most points this year. They are 2-8. They sit dead last in the entire league. Easy to view this game as a bit of a gimme, but quarterback Zach Collaros doesn't see it that way.
They have a lot of talent, and I think sometimes statistics can be misguiding, even records at times. All I can really look at is the level of talent, the level of player that they have over there. And I've been going against a lot of these guys for a long time. I have an immense amount of respect for them. It's going to be a challenge. It always is. It's pro football.
I understand what Collaros is trying to do there, but I don't think a 2-8 record is misleading. Kickoff at 7:30 from Princess Auto Field.
Let's end on baseball. The Blue Jays get a win last night against the Angels.
In a 4-game series against two of the worst teams in baseball, the highlight an Ernie Clement home run that he hits with the ball at his eyes. He was almost ashamed of the pitch selection.
Yeah, I mean, I probably shouldn't be swinging at pitches like that, but, I think that's when you got to reel it back in, and because that doesn't really happen a whole lot. I got to stop swinging at that pitch. I mean, I just kind of react to it. It's happening so fast that I don't really have time to think about how high that was. I just knew I hit it well. I got it on the barrel, and then I saw it kind of at that angle where it has a chance, so that was a crazy one.
Manager John Schneider was asked for his reaction to Clement's home run, and his reaction involved words that I can't repeat on morning radio. So still some fun to be had for the Blue Jays. They continue that series with the Angels tonight.
Beep. Yeah, we didn't have that ready. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
That's Paul McGowan with Morning Sports. Your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. At 7:30, it's 12 degrees and sunny in Brandon, 19 degrees with a fog advisory in downtown Winnipeg. Good morning. I'm Matt Humphrey. The Teamsters Union says workers at Canadian National Railways will be going back to work this morning. It follows the federal labor minister ordering the union, CN, and Canadian Pacific Kansas City enter binding arbitration. As Yvette Brand reports, there's criticism and questions about how long getting back to normal could take.
Both Canada's main rail networks ground to a halt for less than a day.
The fact that there's two, that kind of takes the cake.
Before Federal Labor Minister Steve McKinnon stepped in.
Gave them every possibility and every resource. Fundamentally, we are asking the board to direct a resumption of activities and a return to work at the railways.
But Alberta Transportation Minister Devin Dreesche suggested intervention should have happened before it got to this point, saying inept labour negotiations cost Canada
billions of dollars worth of a mistake that the federal government couldn't do the right thing early when they had the opportunity to. And it also just points out the labour chaos that is currently commonplace here in Canada.
McKinnon says Canada's trade reputation is intact and hopes the plan will prevent the lockout from dragging on. Yvette Brand, CBC News, Vancouver.
Brandon's Women's Resource Centre wants to address issues around intimate partner violence in rural Manitoba. Next month, it's launching a year-long project on women and gender equity. Staff will visit rural communities and find out how best to help domestic violence victims. Kim Iwasik is the center's director of counseling and advocacy. She says recent homicides in McCreary and Carman show how dangerous domestic violence can be.
It's this terrible phenomenon of families being murdered. It's not just the partner, it's the children, it's grandparents, it's older siblings. The grief around that of the trauma of losing an entire family. We have to be thinking of things differently.
Iwasik says better supports are needed to prevent intimate partner violence before it starts, especially in rural and remote communities. The head of a Winnipeg Women's Clinic says she's overjoyed to see Manitoba offering free prescription birth control. Starting October 1st, the province will cover the full cost of 60 different commonly used birth control methods, from IUDs to the pill. Kemlyn Nemard of the Women's Health Clinic says it's great news, but she'd like to see coverage expanded to include some prescription birth control methods.
The morning after pill can be really cost prohibitive for some people, and condoms, quite frankly, they're between 80 and 99% effective, and they're also a barrier form, right? So they actually help protect against STBBIs.
Health Minister Uzoma Asaguera says the government is looking at making the morning after pill more accessible. A resource center serving Inuit in Winnipeg has moved to a bigger location in the city's north end. Drop-ins at Tungasugit started earlier this week at the new center on Selkirk Avenue. It has computers and community services, a kitchen offering country food, and even a laundry service. CEO Nikki Kumaksatiksak says the Inuit community needed a bigger place to call their own.
They are just amazed and floored, and they just cannot believe that this space is for them. It just makes my heart happy to know that my community is finally being taken care of, that they're being supported, that we are being recognized as Inuit people, as Canadians.
The center plans to start offering more programs starting next month, from sewing workshops to Inuktitut language classes for children. The relocation comes after the center received $1 million in federal funding. And finally, in a fiery call to action, Kamala Harris outlined her vision for America last night in Chicago. She made her high-profile pitch to voters as the vice president formally accepted her party's nomination, becoming the Democratic presidential nominee. Katie Simpson has more.
In accepting the Democratic presidential nomination, Kamala Harris is now the first woman of color to lead a party's ticket.
I promise to be a president for all Americans.
Harris made a plea for unity, arguing that in this election, Americans have the opportunity to defeat the politics of anger and division.
Imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails.
Harris painted Donald Trump as dangerous to democracy, contrasting his attempt to steal the 2020 election and promises to free January 6th rioters from jail to that of her life's work as a prosecutor and California Attorney General, arguing that experience makes her the person to fight for freedom, as she says, vowing to restore reproductive rights, protect LGBTQ rights, and voting rights.
And together, let us write the next great chapter.
Katie Simpson, CBC News, Chicago.
And for news anytime, go to cbc.ca/Manitoba or use the CBC News app.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
Matt Humphrey in our news department. 7:35. You're with CBC. It's time for your regional forecast. Here's Chloe Friesen.
Good morning. We're going to start with Dauphin and Thompson. We're looking at air quality advisories in effect for both of those spots. Right now in Dauphin, 17 misty skies. In Thompson, cloudy skies, 15. We're looking at that widespread smoke in both areas, and that is due to wildfire smoke causing very poor air quality and reduced visibility at times. So during heavy smoke conditions, everyone is at risk, a reminder, regardless of their age or health. So if you are experiencing symptoms, do reduce or stop your outdoor activities. Here in Winnipeg, it is foggy out there. We are under a fog advisory still here in the city. That is causing poor visibility outside on highways in Manitoba, also within the city here in Winnipeg. So a lot of fog-covered areas, visibility could be reduced. Regarding highways, we heard from David, who said between Highway 12 and the perimeter, a lot of fog. Visibility was around 150 meters. And then our good friend Lori Hoogstraten is traveling from Winnipeg Beach on Highway 8, and she mentioned that you cannot pass on the highway. The visibility is not good enough for that. So be very careful if you are traveling along highways in Manitoba due to that fog here. Today in Winnipeg, we hopefully will see that fog dissipate this morning. Then looking at a mix of sun and cloud, a high of 29 with the humidex feeling more like 35. If you want to give an update on what the fog is doing for your commute, or if anything else is getting in your way, we are looking at Keniston and Tuxedo. There are lane reductions in all directions leading to that intersection. So expect delays, use alternate routes there. The number to call is 204-788-3093.
All right. Thank you, Chloe. Well, next on the show, as part of our community gardening series, we're now going to visit a garden that is full of color, fragrance, and tradition. Eva Pipp started her garden just southwest of Beausejour more than 3 decades ago, but some of those plants were on her property long before then. This is a massive garden, and it's also one that carries on her Ukrainian heritage with plants like sweet flag, bachelor buttons, black tomatoes, and even some 200-year-old peonies. CBC Manitoba community reporter Shanley Vidal got a tour.
It grows as a mat.
Okay.
Right?
Oh.
See, like it grows like a mat.
It looks like grass, but then it's covered in pink flowers.
Yes, a creeping carnation or pink, and this is from Ukraine. And in the springtime, it's entirely covered with perfumed flowers. They smell like carnations.
You have some plants that have been around for generations, and you have such a love of plants.
My own love of plants comes from my mother, because she came from a long line of Ukrainian gardeners and farmers. And in the Ukrainian soul, you can't really separate Ukrainian from plants, and the entire culture is woven through with plant lore. So you have it in the dances, in the language, in the songs especially. This is sage. All the sages, they have the white, powdery looking leaves like this, and they're very aromatic. They have a strong odor to them.
Oh, wow.
And that was probably one of the reasons why it was considered a useful herb for warding off evil. My own parents, they spent years in the concentration camps in Germany. So when they were liberated, obviously they couldn't bring anything with them. And so we settled in the North End. A lot of our neighbors, they were Ukrainian as well, and they had come over much earlier. And they had brought plants with them. And so they gave my mother the plants that they had brought from Ukraine. And then over the years, I kind of accumulated more and more things, because it was not just plants that they had brought, but seeds as well.
Your oldest thing here, is it the peonies?
That was in 1953. At that point, they were already more than 100 years old. There are white ones, and there's a white one with red splotches, and there's also the red-purple one.
They may be a little burnt, but they're huge.
Yes.
When these are in full bloom and you look at them, how does that make you feel?
It's such delight, especially since it takes you back to your ancestors and the previous generations that enjoyed these same plants. And they bloom year after year after year, no matter what the conditions are. But they're like faithful old friends. For these homesteaders that originally came to the bush, right, they were just simply dropped off in virgin bush with an axe and little else. And they had brought with them these treasures that were their plants. That was the most valuable thing that they had, because when they came here, they had no idea what they would find here. So they didn't know whether they would have the plants that they needed for food, for medicine, for their rituals, for their religious ceremonies. Of course, you also had roses in Ukraine, used in a lot of rituals. So this one now, it's already kind of finishing, but
they're beautiful color.
Yeah.
Deep pink.
These are the late season flowers now on this rose. In Ukrainian culture, the rose was associated with a lot of magical ceremonies, and especially love.
What was it like when you moved here more than 30 years ago?
It was just solid bush. There was a house here, but that was pretty well it. The bush was right up to the house. It's extremely therapeutic, because it's not just, even though it's a lot of work, you have tangible history in your hands. These are hops. This is a vine that, again, was very popular in Ukrainian gardens. It was used for brewing beer in Ukraine. Later on, these will become like little cones.
Makes me think of Virginia creeper or some other vine, because how it's all wrapped around the fence.
Yes. And to my surprise, a lot of the plants, even though nobody had been looking after them for years and years and years, they were still managing to try to survive. And so I started to record what you found in these old Ukrainian gardens, because these were the things that they had brought with them from Ukraine. Because to me, this is something that is just disappearing daily as these old properties get bought up and plowed up and developed. And so all of that gets completely destroyed, and you have no record of this part of our heritage. Besides the sunflower, there are a lot of other really beloved plants for Ukrainians. So one of them is the poppy, but also you had bachelor buttons, which are these blue flowers. They too are a Ukrainian staple.
CBC Manitoba's community reporter Shanley Vidal in Cloverleaf, Manitoba, southwest of Beausejour, where Eva Pip has cultivated a garden full of meaningful Ukrainian plants. You can also tune in to see this piece tonight on CBC Television News at 6.
Food, art, music, dance, and more. Cultivation Festival FAMD is back August 19th to 25th. Proudly sponsored by CBC. Come celebrate Manitoba's rich Filipino culture with events taking place all over the city, like Ceremonia, an all-Philippine X art exhibit, Lupa Ay Bahay, a Filipino indigenous craft exhibit, and Sala, a Filipino film festival. Visit cbc.ca/Manitoba/community for details.
The sound of the birds. Think back to when you were a kid, roaming around outdoors, playing, exploring the world around you. Maybe you loved climbing trees or just spending time in the swings. But it seems that these days, playing outside just isn't as fun as it used to be. And parents, you partially might be to blame. Too many rules on playgrounds that lack luster as well. Some experts are saying that everything might just be too safe. So how do we collectively fix this and get kids more off the couch and back outside and have a return to risky play? Well, we're having a series of conversations all about this week. It started with a piece that you can read on our website, all about risky play at cbc.ca/Manitoba. But today we want to learn more about it, and we want to talk more about also how we can design spaces that promote, quote unquote, risky play. Mariana Brusoni is a professor at the University of British Columbia. She's director of the Human Early Learning Partnership. And I spoke to her this week all about this.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
When you say risky play, how do you define that?
We talk about it as thrilling or exciting forms of play where children engage with uncertainty. And so the thrill and excitement comes from kids pushing themselves beyond where they typically have. So, for example, climbing a bit higher, jumping a bit farther, those sorts of things. And the engaging with uncertainty is they don't know what's going to happen. Could be good, could be bad. And that's part of the thrill and the fun and also part of the important learning.
We had some listeners write in this week, and one of them wrote in that her daughter was excited to get to the playground until she saw a slide that was too safe and boring in her view. What are some of the benefits when maybe that slide's a little higher and there is a little bit of risk built in?
Yeah, we hear that a lot from kids in terms of play spaces being not challenging enough for them and then getting bored quickly. So in terms of some of the benefits, sometimes you talked about earlier, our favorite childhood play memories. And so for many of us, it can be very intuitive in terms of what we got out of those. And so people talk about a sense of joy and fun and freedom and moving their bodies in ways that they maybe normally wouldn't, and exploring how far they can push themselves and hanging out with friends and setting their own limits and all of that kind of stuff. And so if you think about children's health and development, it's very simple in terms of big effects on children's physical activity. They're much more physically active. They're less sedentary. They're gaining physical literacy skills, understanding how to move their body. They're understanding about the world and how the world reacts to them. They're understanding about their own comfort level with how far they want to and can push themselves. And in fact, if you think about how the body reacts, it's the same thing as a fight or flight response. And so they're getting experience with these very strong emotions and not rushing to interpret them as threats or harm, but really kind of leaning into the excitement of exploration. And this becomes very important because if children don't have, don't get used to these kinds of experiences, then they could be more likely to interpret kind of new and different things, uncertainties, other risks as threats, and therefore really limit their experiences and potentially even increase symptoms of anxiety.
Why do you think that risk is disappearing from play?
We don't want to blame parents, but there has been a change in the norms around parenting, which is part of it. So the norms around what we call intensive parenting that really emerged kind of in the late 80s, where it became normal for parents to be much more involved in their kids' lives, to make sure that they got the right experiences, were supervised, and were in various activities to set them up for academic success. And in the case of that, we kind of lost sight about the importance of kids just being able to be kids and play and take risks and not be around adults all the time. And then, of course, we've had a change in our cities, so we have very car-centric way of designing cities, which has taken green space away, and it's taken the freedom of mobility for a lot of neighborhoods. And much more dense neighborhoods where it's harder to know your neighbor and feel comfortable that your kids are going to be safe and those sorts of things. So there's all these perceptions that the world is a much less safe place when in fact the statistics show the opposite.
So let me ask you to build on that, because there will be people listening thinking we do need rules to keep kids safe, but they may be wondering how often are kids injured or even kidnapped while out playing, because you're talking about the late 80s, and I think that also was something that crept in there, people worried about abductions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anybody can think about, in terms of their childhood, one of those really evocative and horrible news stories. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the statistics, those stranger kidnappings are extremely rare. In fact, it's a 1 in 14 million chance, which is the same chance as winning Lotto 649. We've also looked at the injury statistics in terms of just kids getting hurt. And yeah, kids get hurt, they can go to emerge, they could even have broken arms. But when we look at serious injuries, they're extremely rare. And deaths are almost non-existent. So just to give you an example, if you look at the statistics available across Canada, there's, for falls from trees, we have 23 years worth of statistics and not a single childhood death from a fall from tree. And if you look at we have statistics from 2007 to 2022, again, for falls from play equipment. And over that entire time, we have 2 deaths compared to hundreds and hundreds of deaths, for example, of kids as passengers in cars.
When we look at the design of playgrounds or the redesign of playgrounds to encourage riskier play, what would you say could be critical to that? I understand you have sort of a 3 key ingredient rule.
Yeah, we talk about the 3 key ingredients being time, space, and freedom. So time for people to realize that kids need these opportunities every day, that it should just be a normal part of every child's life. And so making that a priority to make it part of the day, not only at home, but at school and childcare, everywhere that kids spend time. The freedom side of things is adults letting kids, just explore. So kind of trying to temper our own fears and feelings around this and, our tendencies to say be careful or to say no. And we have a tool for adults and also tools for teachers and early childhood educators on outsideplay.org to help them work through these things. With respect to the space, it's having space that is easy for kids to access and that is interesting and fun. And so there's really simple ways that you can increase the interest and fun. So first of all, it's thinking about challenge. You've got kids with various levels of developmental stages and comfort levels with risk. And so how do you make these graduated challenges so that even the kids that want a lot of challenge can get it? And then also just we talk about bringing in loose parts, things like sticks, mud, rocks, sand, tarps, boxes, those kinds of things that kids can move around so that their imagination can shape the play. They can build stuff, they can tear it down, they can try new things, they can work together to do things. And so those are like really inexpensive things that can be put into playgrounds and that also usually are natural materials and can really engage kids with the wonders of nature.
And just last, you were talking about how some of our neighborhoods are also, we have green spaces disappearing. How can we reintroduce play, more risky play, safely into neighborhoods? At the design and that bigger level, what do you hope that maybe municipalities or cities might be thinking about?
It's a great question. And really what we need to move towards is a child-centric design where we think about child-friendly cities. And what we found that when cities are designed in child-friendly ways and thinking about how children get around and them being able to play in all parts of their neighborhood, everybody benefits. And those cities also become more sustainable. One of the classic tests is the popsicle test. Can a child walk to a local corner store, buy a popsicle, and walk back home before that popsicle melts? Something as simple as that, right? And it just gets you thinking differently about how kids can move through space and what opportunities they can access.
Great conversation, Mariana. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Mariana Brusoni is a professor at the University of British Columbia and director of the Human Early Learning Partnership. Now, I mentioned this is a series of conversations we've been having, prompted by a column on our website about risky play, and also some of the stats in there as well that you can read. We asked you on Facebook around this, given that there is a change in terms of generationally. Fewer kids playing outdoors freely than they did in previous generations. What sense you make of this, or how you're seeing it present in your own life? And a lot of examples, but then also some pushback saying my kids do play outside. So here's some of the comments that came in. There's like 130 of them on our Facebook page, so big talker. Candy Shelby says, my grandkids are aged 2, 3, 7, and 10. They play outside all the time. We have families who live on acreages outside Brandon. My daughter faithfully takes the kids every day for a walk or bike ride down the Mile Road in the back, and the kids love being outside. Corrine Anderson said Riverview Ashland Child Care Center in Manitoba just licensed our Forest Nursery School this morning. So she was writing in earlier this week. We'll have to visit. She says we would love to have a full day program, but we are hitting roadblocks that have been put up by the city and the province that prevent us from having full day outside with preschool age children. So certainly sounds like there might be something for us to look into there. My colleague, actually, Leonard Monkman, wrote in and said, I think you have to be intentional about it. We have a toddler. He watches TV, no iPad or phone yet, but I also take him outside for an hour or two every day. But you have to just get outside and do it. And hopefully he continues to like going outside of the house in the future. Andrea Richardson wrote in. I'm going to share this comment because a lot of you wrote in and had a comment that was similar to this. She said, allowing your child to go to the park alone, then helicopter parents report you for negligence. So a lot of you have actually written in and said that you might send your kid out, but you feel that there could be a report, or you fear there could be a report coming for negligent parenting. So I just wanted to reflect that is obviously something that families are dealing with here. Ian McCausland, looking at infrastructure. We were talking there about the design, the popsicle stick test, I think Mariana called it. Ian said, Google why Dutch kids are happiest in the world. Here's a hint. He says they feel safe riding their bikes everywhere. Kind of like what we did in the 70s and 80s. And finally, Lori Tresser just reminding all of us as we have this conversation, everything's changed. We don't use horse and buggy anymore either. So lots of different comments and points of view, and that's what we welcome here. You can write to us on Facebook. That is my Marcy Marcusa page, which during the show acts as a show page. We are on the air till 8:37 a.m. Right now it's 3 minutes to 8 o'clock. We do have a fog advisory for the Red River Valley. There's near zero visibility in some cases. In Winnipeg, we still have that fog hanging around. Often by 8 o'clock, it kind of dissipates, but it's still shrouding the tops of the downtown buildings here in Winnipeg. So it's 19 and foggy. A high today of 29 with Humidex. It's going to feel like 35. And we have a mix of sun and cloud for the rest of the day. I should mention there is an air quality statement and advisory that's put out, and that is affecting Thompson and Dauphin this morning. So different parts of the province, but both due to smoke. So you might be dealing with that. On the morning commute, if you're dealing with any of these things as a problem or anything else, let us know, 788-3093. Matt Humphrey is in now with our headlines. Good morning again.
Good morning. There's renewed concern among southwestern Manitoba groups working with people experiencing intimate partner violence. They say 2 horrific multiple homicides this year show better access to supports is needed in rural Manitoba. Our province has continuously had one of the highest rates of intimate partner violence in Canada. Teams at the Brandon's Brandon Women's Resource Center are launching a year-long outreach project focusing on gender equity. They say if they don't reach out to people, especially men, the cycle of violence will continue. We'll hear more about that after World Report.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
Still on that story, yesterday, Rob Canoe, the Premier, said he is looking at designating intimate partner violence as an epidemic. But would that be purely symbolic, or could it come with real change? Well, an advocate out of Ontario, and they are close to doing this because they have a bill already in the works, they say it could hold a lot of power. So we'll find out more about why they took those steps there. That's after 8. We find ourselves, though, with a minute here, and I want to ask Chloe Friesen how the Burt Block party was last night, because it was the first of what's happening through the weekend.
It was amazing. I stayed up way too late, but it was entirely worth it. I have to say, Blue Rodeo, amazing. Skydiggers, I've never seen them live before, but growing up, I heard their music.
Yeah.
So fun to watch them perform. I think my highlight was Indian City. I'm going to be honest. I've been listening to their music for a couple of years. It was my first time seeing them live. And Jim Cuddy joining the band for Star People and dedicating it to Vince Fontaine was just a beautiful, beautiful moment.
One of many memories to be made this weekend, I think. Thanks for sharing, Chloe. That concert series, of course, going on right in downtown Winnipeg, and it continues through the weekend. It is now 1 minute to 8 o'clock. World Report is next, the latest in national and international news. Stay with us.
Today on Q.
When I first began working on this book, it wasn't even meant to be a memoir.
I'm Talia Schlinger, sitting in for Tom Power. Men Have Called Her Crazy is the title of a new memoir by artist Anna Marie Tendler. She talks about mental health, using photography as a means of survival, and why she didn't mention her public divorce from John Mulaney in the book.
Q, this morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts. The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current.
I'm Connie Walker. Ontario is the latest province to put strict limits on safe consumption sites, as it and other parts of the country push to add more treatment centres. How best to help Canadians facing addiction? Coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm John Northcott.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris accepting the Democratic Party nomination for president, wrapping up the 4-day Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It's game on now for the matchup with Republican nominee for President Donald Trump. The CBC's Ithel Musa is in Chicago. Ithel, what stood out for you in last night's acceptance speech?
Well, certainly the energy and the enthusiasm. Vice President Kamala Harris used her speech to reintroduce herself to Americans, the daughter of immigrants from a middle-class background who rose from prosecutor to vice president. Harris promised Americans to tackle major policy issues like protecting the right to abortion and lowering the cost of health care, housing, and groceries. Harris also addressed the Israel-Hamas war, saying she will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, but she did say this.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Okay, the convention is over. Anyone who's been watching over the last 4 days, it's pretty clear that she has her party behind her. What comes next, Ithel?
Harris will now head back to the campaign trail. She only has a few months before the election and only a few weeks before her presidential debate with Donald Trump. This is a historic moment in U.S. politics. Harris is the first female vice president, and she's the first Black woman and person of South Asian descent to lead a major party ticket. The hope among Democrats is that she'll be able to ride this wave of excitement. But during his speech at the convention, former President Barack Obama warned it will be a tight race, and there's still a lot of work to be done by Democrats to defeat Trump.
CBC's Ithel Musa in Chicago. Thanks, Ithel.
You're welcome.
Here in this country, Teamsters Canada Rail says the lockout at CN Rail is now over, and the members will begin returning to work there today. But the work stoppage will continue at Canadian Pacific, Kansas City. That company and the union are due to meet with the Labour Relations Board this morning. As Yvette Bren tells us, it could be a while before the country returns to regular service.
Both Canada's main rail networks ground to a halt for less than a day.
The fact that there's two, that kind of takes the cake.
Before Federal Labour Minister Steve McKinnon stepped in.
Gave them every possibility and every resource. Unfortunately, we are at an impasse. Fundamentally, we are asking the board to direct a resumption of activities and a return to work at the railways.
But Alberta Transportation Minister Devin Dreesche suggested intervention should have happened before it got to this point, saying inept labour negotiations cost Canada
billions of dollars worth of a mistake that the federal government couldn't do the right thing early when they had the opportunity to. And it also just points out the labour chaos that is currently commonplace here in Canada.
McKinnon says Canada's trade reputation is intact and hopes the plan will prevent the lockout from dragging on. In Montreal, before the minister's announcement, National Teamsters Union's Francois Laporte said safety issues are at the heart of this dispute.
Safety of the rail in general. We don't want to see another lac mégantic to happen again.
As he and other rail workers now look to see what this government intervention will look like and if the union's concerns will finally be addressed. Yvette Bren, CBC News, Vancouver.
Narendra Modi is in Kyiv for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. India's leader is positioning himself as a possible broker for peace in the region. As Julia Chapman reports, that's despite India maintaining close ties with Russia ever since it invaded Ukraine.
यूक्रेन और पश्चिम एशिया में चल रहे संघर्ष.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying to strike a balance. He's long pushed for diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine. At the same time, India has benefited from cut-price Russian oil and remains a major buyer of Russian weapons. India is known for what it calls non-alignment, a policy of neutrality its critics describe as opportunism.
This is part of India trying to project its rising status.
Bhavna Dave is from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London.
Eventually, this had to take place, and especially given the global status that India is projecting, India could not have just remained aligned or talking to Russia and not being engaged with Ukraine.
Mr. Modi was in Moscow just a few weeks ago. While he was there, bombs fell on a children's hospital in Kyiv on one of the bloodiest days of the war. That same day, Modi shared a hug with President Vladimir Putin, which President Volodymyr Zelensky called a devastating blow to peace efforts. Traveling to Kyiv suggests Mr. Modi is willing to listen to both sides. Officials in Kyiv are hopeful that he can exert pressure on Moscow, but Ukraine is unlikely to convince India to distance itself from Russia completely. Julia Chapman, CBC News, London.
The trade dispute between China and the West continues to heat up. Beijing now says it will look into government subsidies being provided to European dairy producers. As Lisa Xing reports, it's a tit-for-tat response following an announcement by Brussels that the EU is revising tariffs on electric vehicles made in China.
A possible retaliatory tariff can possibly give EU pause for thought.
Gil Lan, a professor of international trade at Toronto Metropolitan University, says China's latest move is moderate as it opens an investigation into European subsidies on dairy imports.
It could have just put the tariffs on immediately, but that would go against its narrative about being a responsible world trading power.
Earlier this week, the EU revised its proposed tariff hike on Chinese electric vehicle imports, down slightly to 36%, but Beijing had called on Brussels to scrap the increase altogether. China will take all necessary measures to defend the rights and interests of Chinese companies, said spokesperson Mao Ning. The ongoing trade spat, a result of Brussels launching an investigation into China's state support for EV makers. All this as the West scrambles to bolster its domestic manufacturing and China threatens to overtake international markets. The U.S. slapped on 100% tariffs in the spring. Canada is currently considering its next steps. If it follows suit, it could mean
essentially asking Canadian consumers to pay a high price for electric vehicles.
University of Alberta economics professor Jia Tengzong says China and Western countries will have to weigh their priorities because an escalation could also mean a big hit to other domestic industries. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Finally, Ottawa says it will no longer pay for temporary accommodations in Pakistan for new applicants for a program meant to help its former Afghan employees. Rafi Boudjikanian reports.
Islamabad, Pakistan. A group of Afghans chant at a protest targeting Ottawa. Some say they've been in the Pakistani capital for nearly 3 years while waiting to find out if they'll be admitted to Canada on special immigration measures meant for former employees of the Canadian government or armed forces. The government put those in place after the Taliban took over Afghanistan, sending former staff of Western forces into hiding.
We put our families in danger.
Muhammad Yunus Nasimi moved to Islamabad with his wife and children from Afghanistan in October 2021. The former Canadian military contractor is still waiting for a decision on his immigration application.
How come you are making me sit here?
Some migrants say the wait is wasteful as their stay is subsidized by the federal government until they're approved for travel to Canada or receive a final rejection. The Immigration Department tells CBC News it's paid close to $43 million for Afghans waiting in Pakistan since 2022. But it says it has stopped providing money for accommodations to any new applicants since the end of June.
I would urge the government to err on the side of caution.
Zul Solomon is an immigration lawyer in Vancouver. He says Ottawa did make a promise to Afghans.
It's a large group of people who very much helped us.
The government says more than 53,000 Afghans have moved here since 2021. Rafi Boudjikanian on CBC News, Ottawa.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
Well, we made it to Friday, everyone, and welcome to it. Thanks for being part of our show this morning and including us in the start to your day. Really foggy out there. It's going to be muggy today as well in Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at CBC's Information Radio on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube where you can see those foggy photos right now. This half hour on the program, the province of Ontario could soon see intimate partner violence declared an epidemic. That is, if Bill 173, or the Intimate Partner Violence Epidemic Act, is passed. Now, on our show yesterday, Premier Rob Canoe here in Manitoba said that our province could go in the same direction. The question is the designation of epidemic purely symbolic, or would it come with real change? We're going to go to Ontario this half hour. An advocate there says the word and their bill both hold a lot of power, and we'll find out why. First, though, we have headlines to update with Matt Humphrey.
Good morning. At the top of the news this morning, the federal labor minister has now stepped in to get trains moving again. It comes after an unprecedented lockout by Canada's two largest rail companies. The labor minister used his power to ask the Canada Industrial Relations Board to impose final binding arbitration, asking the board to order the railways to resume operations under the terms of the current collective agreements until new deals are in place. There's been criticism of the move. We'll hear some of that and all the other news throughout the morning.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Back soon.
Chloe, what's Friday going to look like in Winnipeg?
Foggy.
It's already looking
for
that
a
way,
while.
yep.
Yeah. We hopefully will see that fog dissipate, but it is still lingering for much of this morning, and that is causing some issues when it comes to visibility and the commute. I'll get into that shortly here, but just a reminder that dense fog has developed over the Red River Valley early this morning, and it's resulting in near zero visibility at times. We've heard from some folks traveling in highways around Winnipeg. Highway 8, we got a call that it it's just impossible to pass, especially on the highway, so be very careful. As well, Highway 213, just near the perimeter, lots of fog, poor visibility. So there's a few things you need to watch out for regarding that fog. We should see it dissipate in the morning into a mix of sun and cloud. Forecasted high is 29 degrees. With the humidex here in Winnipeg, it'll feel more like 35. So we will be keeping an eye on that fog here. We're also looking at advisories for Thompson and Dauphin. Air quality advisories in effect for both of those spots today due to widespread smoke. So make sure that you are listening to your body. If you're experiencing symptoms, reduce or stop outdoor activities. When it comes to the commute, that fog is kind of the main thing to keep an eye on here in Winnipeg and outside of the city. But also Keniston and Tuxedo. There's lane reductions in all directions leading to that intersection. Your northbound left turn lane, northbound and southbound median lanes, eastbound curb and westbound median lanes are blocked in different areas, so expect delays around that intersection at Keniston and Tuxedo. If there's anything else going on, if you want to give me a fog update from where you're at, 204-788-3093.
Cue Lori Hoekstraat, who just drove in from north of the city.
You
got to the newsroom. Yeah, you look relieved. Was it foggy?
It was very foggy. It was, I have to say, though, the crops of sunflowers wreathed in fog on the dump road. It's probably got another name, but we call it the dump road. Could be 229. Was fantastic. And the fog was very thick. I mean, you could see the road, but there's no way you should pass. But I have to admire the drivers. Like, everybody was just like, okay, there was
driving
distance,
to condition?
Driving to conditions. The only problem is if you get behind somebody who's going like 50, and really, you could go 90. But it was very foggy, and actually foggier as I got closer to the city.
So it's a pretty drive, but be patient, and
very
hopefully
careful.
you'll be going the speed limit if it's safe, but maybe not passing.
Definitely not passing.
Thank you, Lori, for popping in.
Thank you.
During Chloe's commuter report. Lori's actually going to pop back in a little bit later in this half hour to tell us what's coming up in the calling conversation today on CBC on Radio Noon. Well, to a serious story now. RCMP describe it as, quote, horrific act of intimate partner violence. I'm talking, of course, about what happened in McCreary, where Marlon Glover, a 41-year-old man, killed 3 people at a home in the municipality of McCreary before dying of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It all happened a week ago. His former partner, who escaped into the woods and hid from Glover, had previously filed a protection order against him. Now, the event echoes the deaths of 5 people in Carman, including 3 children and a teenager who were also killed in an act of intimate partner violence in Manitoba that happened in February. Premier Wap Kinew joined us on the show live yesterday, and he said this about declaring intimate partner violence an epidemic in our province.
That is something that we have been having a conversation about. With my colleagues, such as the ones that I mentioned, Minister Smith and Fontaine, but also the Minister of Health and others in our government. And so I think also one of the things that we're doing now is asking Dr. Rusin for his professional public health opinion on this being declared an epidemic. It's an interesting thing that I think we need expertise on, but I think one of the things that we would all recognize is that and I'm using this in the layperson's meaning of the term, this seems to be contagious.
Now, this approach to have intimate partner violence officially labeled and designated an epidemic is not only something happening or that governments are interested in here. The province of Ontario is pursuing this more actively. They're further down the way in this. They have Bill 173, the Intimate Partner Violence Epidemic Act of 2024. It was just introduced in March by 4 Ontario NDP MPs. The bill, which is now at committee for consideration, would require the government of Ontario to recognize that intimate partner violence is an epidemic in that province. Now, the City of Toronto and nearly 100 municipalities have already declared intimate partner violence an epidemic locally. The question is, does it matter? Or is it just a label? What real change could this bring? A provincial bill. Will it actually change things on the front lines? Sammy Pritchard is our next guest, manager of advocacy at the YWCA Toronto, an organization that helps women, girls, and gender diverse people flee from violence. That organization has been urging leaders in Ontario to pass this bill. And Sammy also says that the bill could hold a lot of power. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thanks for being with us. So, what inspired your call to want to have intimate partner violence declared an epidemic in Ontario?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This call to action really came after sustained advocacy of the gender-based violence sector across Ontario, of advocates, of survivors, and of many loved ones of those lost to femicide. But more pointedly, this specific call to action to declare intimate partner violence an epidemic was derived from the first of 86 recommendations from a coroner's inquest that took place in 2022, which was nearly a decade after the triple femicide of three women, Carol Culleton, Anastasia Kuzik, and Natalie Warmerdam, in a part of rural Ontario known as Renfrew County, who were all killed by the same man.
So 86 recommendations, the declaration of this being an epidemic, was one of them. Why does that matter? Because people wonder, it's obviously, I don't mean why does the issue matter, but is it just a label? How do you make sure it has teeth and it creates change?
Absolutely. I think this question comes up a lot of why. Why do we need to name this as an epidemic? And I think that I know that it's really important that this violence is accurately and publicly acknowledged as the crisis that it is. We can have action plans and we can have ideas of how to tackle it, but if we don't start by first recognizing the severity of the crisis that we're navigating, we cannot change anything. We cannot change what we refuse to name.
You said 86 recommendations. The declaration of an epidemic was just one of them. What were some, maybe two of the other most critical ones in your view, as you're seeking to hope to improve things in the safety in Ontario for around intimate partner violence?
Absolutely. I of course have to say that I think all of the recommendations are important to consider, and ranging from how we can work from a prevention lens, the accountability mechanisms that need to go into place. I think talking about having sustainable long-term permanent funding is one of those really important recommendations for the gender-based violence sector that works to address this pervasive violence, and having those accountability measures in place to ensure we're holding our governments accountable to take action on these issues. But really just that framing of this as a public health approach that's needed to address this violence, I think, is really key in starting us here.
If it's framed as an epidemic, for example, in Ontario, are you hoping it will mean increased funding or more resources for frontline workers? Like, does the labeling of this as an epidemic actually strengthen the case for that?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Yes, this is a major and frankly a global public health concern. The World Health Organization named it as such because it impacts millions of people and has negative physical, mental, economic, and social health consequences. And having that public health approach within a coordinated whole of society response sends a really clear message that we take the lives and well-being of women, gender diverse people, and their families seriously. And it's also a necessary public health or public policy choice, and one that would allow funding to flow to robust public health measures that include prevention, early intervention, and public education, and could ensure that different institutions that interact with people impacted by gender-based violence, from healthcare to housing to courts and schools and workplaces, are attuned to and center the needs of every survivor.
I'm glad you started talking about the public health implications that could come from labeling this as an epidemic, because yesterday when the Premier said, actually Dr. Roussin, our public officer of health in Manitoba, immediately when he was talking about Dr. Roussin, I actually had a moment where I thought, I think that a lot of Manitobans might at first blush not sort of look at intimate partner violence and be thinking of this as almost like a holistic issue. I was reading about some of the challenges and what are needed, and we were talking about shelter spaces and such, but I mean, lack of housing is also a major issue for you guys there, and it relates to this as well, right?
Absolutely. There are many factors that increase the likelihood of intimate partner violence, and it stems from, various gender norms and stereotypes that are still really prevalent today that show up in our systems that, simply put, we're not built with women in mind. But if we consider this in the sense of risks, we can say that unaffordable housing, financial insecurity, lack of access to support services, including adequate health care, all impact the likelihood that a person will experience violence.
Did you have any pushback to labeling intimate partner violence an epidemic to this bill?
Yes, the government in Ontario here initially rejected the recommendation, which led to, as you noted at the beginning of this segment, a pretty incredible movement led by communities urging municipalities to take action. And to date, nearly 100 have across Ontario declaring IPV an epidemic. And it really signals a recognition that GBV, gender-based violence, and intimate partner violence are impacting our safety and our community well-being. But since that initial rejection, and with this, I would say, groundswell of attention and recognition and the declarations made addressing this violence for what it is, the government in Ontario shifted its position on declaring intimate partner violence an epidemic and has been entertaining Bill 173, the Intimate Partner Violence Epidemic Act, by sending it through second reading and reviewing it at the Justice Policy Committee. So it's really great that the committee is giving attention to this crisis, but there's no denying this crisis, and there's no reason why this bill shouldn't become law as soon as the House resumes in the fall. We know that between 2019 and 2023, sadly, there have been 237 confirmed cases of femicides in Ontario, and 39% of these have been confirmed as by an intimate partner.
Thank you for your time this morning, Sammy Pritchard. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sammy Pritchard, the manager of advocacy at YWCA Toronto. The organization helps women, girls, and gender diverse people flee violence. And we wanted to speak with someone out of Ontario this morning because they're ahead of us in this idea that the Premier brought up on the show yesterday of declaring intimate partner violence an epidemic. They're ahead of us in that they have a bill that is already poised to be passed.
The CBC News app delivers the answers you want to know and need to know.
What an extraordinary scene.
The breaking stories that shape your world. Reporting from the scene onto your screens.
Dropping the 8 now. We're just approaching Gaza.
Your source for mobile news. Delivered when you want, where you want.
This situation has changed very quickly.
The CBC News app. Download for free.
Time right now is 8:24 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 a.m. on the app or on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining us this Friday morning. Lots going on in and around town. We're talking about the fog this morning. It's going to be sticky today, and that means tonight for the Bomber game, if you're going, few clouds, low 17. Not bad. Shouldn't be as hot, obviously, by the evening, so it'll be a pretty good night. We do have a little bit of rain in the forecast. It looks like we could get a 60% chance of showers on Sunday. I'm selfishly watching that because that's my night to go to the Burt Block party. So, but of course, they do have plans if you're one of the people that has tickets to that big show in downtown Winnipeg or series of shows. And of course, just wanting to get out and about because we're nearing the end of, we're creeping into back to school time. And you're probably maybe trying to get out and about with those last minute summer plans. So weather should be cooperating for the next little while. Well, how about a little music this morning from someone we haven't heard from in a little while because it's been nearly a decade since Winnipeg blues musician Rami May shared new music. She has a 7th studio album out now, though. It's called Small Victories. So we have the lead single from the album. This is Come On, Baby.
Come on, baby, where are you going? Where are you going? I'm sitting right here. Come on, baby, where are you going? time. You got me losing my hair. I ain't going nowhere. Everybody wants you, but I'm the one that needs you. Everybody wants you, but I'm the one that feeds you. Everybody wants you, but I'm the one that teases you. Everybody wants you, but I'm the one that pleases you.
Romy Mays and Come On, Baby. She always sounds so cool.
She is so cool.
I know, she's so cool. You're going to find that tune on her new album, Small Victory. She performs at the Blue Note Park next month, so she's in Ontario right now. She's going to be back in Manitoba to play her hometown. Well, the also very cool Laurie Hoogstraat is who we just heard from.
Bit foggy this morning, feeling a bit foggy.
Are you?
Well,
what do you work?
Having driven through it.
What are you working on for noon? What is your calling
for
today?
noon, I know you covered this on the show as well, but Winnipeg police are warning people about an uptick in fraudulent phone calls claiming to be from their financial institutions. There's been a lot of complaints about calls that claim that the accounts have been compromised and like danger, 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 or unauthorized transactions being made, and money is being sent to the fraudsters. This is not good. So on our call-in conversation, we will talk to Jeff Horncastle with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre about what you can do to dodge these kind of deceitful texts and calls, and I'm sure many of us have had them. So we want you to call 204-780-0893, or if you want to leave a voicemail before the show, 204-788-3797.
All right. Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you.
So that's between 12:30 and 1 o'clock today on the call-in conversation on Radio Noon. It is coming up to 8:30, and we're going to wrap our show at 8:37, as you know, so the news is coming up shortly. But I want to mention just on the morning commute, just a reminder, Laurie was alluding to it there, that it is really foggy. There is an advisory out there. It's the whole Red River Valley. So Laurie comes in from north of Winnipeg out of the Gimli area, and so that's that drive, pretty foggy. And but it's also extending sort of throughout the city of Winnipeg as well and surrounding areas. It's not bad. It seems to have improved in the downtown a little bit, but just take note of it, because usually by this time of the morning it has dissipated, but not so much this Friday. There's also air quality statements issued for Thompson and Dauphin, and your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. At 8:30, it's mostly cloudy and 10 degrees in Churchill, 19 degrees with a fog advisory in downtown Winnipeg. Good morning, I'm Matt Humphrey. Now that binding arbitration has been imposed on Canada's rail contract disputes, the Teamsters Union is taking down picket lines at CN Rail, and those workers will be back on the job today. But that is not the case at Canadian Pacific Kansas City. That company, the union, and the Labor Relations Board meet later this morning. Janice McGregor has the latest.
This story is shifting from what the Teamsters called an employer-driven lockout to a really uncertain situation. Workers have not returned to CPKC this morning. The union had given strike notice there. So as negotiators for both sides resumed talks with the Industrial Relations Board this morning, the question here is, what happens if the union is not prepared to accept binding arbitration? Or more specifically, do they have the legal right not to? And therefore, could we see the Teamsters remain on the picket lines in what would now be a strike? Proponents of the union's perspective that it was inappropriate of the federal government to interfere in these negotiations point to a 2015 Supreme Court ruling that found that the right to freedom of association in Canada's charter includes workers' right to strike if collective bargaining breaks down. In other words, can the federal government move to end a lockout, which is what yesterday was, but not necessarily a strike? Janice McGregor, CBC News, Ottawa.
The John Howard Society of Brandon wants communities to work together to address intimate partner violence. The society is working to encourage those conversations with its Building Healthy Relationships program. Executive Director Ross Robinson says the program can help people have better relationships. The society wants to bring it into more rural communities. And Robinson says the recent triple homicide near McCreary shows how the issue needs to be addressed.
We need to get together. The biggest thing that I think that can help is the community. We're keeping an eye on each other, loving each other in a proper fashion, looking out for their health, looking out for their finances, looking out for whatever's going on in their life, and being aware and concerned.
Robinson says organizations like John Howard need to reach out to people, especially men, and build relationships. He says this can help prevent domestic violence. People in Winnipeg's Inuit community say they're happy to call a new space their own. The Tunga Sugi Resources Centre has moved into a larger building on Selkirk Avenue. It offers services to Inuit transitioning to urban life in Winnipeg, like computers and a laundry service. It also has a kitchen to prepare traditional Inuit foods known as country food. Kelly Hicks-McKayak is a grade 12 student. He says the entire community can now gather in just one place.
The biggest, most important thing is that connection, that reconnection, because we all in Nunavut gather together all the time. And now that we're living in Winnipeg, it's a little bit different. We're very separated. I think the second biggest thing is definitely that country food. We need that country food.
The center plans to start offering a variety of programs next month, from traditional craft workshops to Inuktitut language classes. The head of a women's clinic says she's happy prescription birth control will soon be free across the province, but hopes Manitoba goes one step further. Starting October 1st, the province will cover the full cost of 60 commonly used birth control methods, from IUDs to the pill. Kemlyn Nemard is executive director of the Women's Health Clinic in Winnipeg. She says prescription birth control can be cost prohibitive for a lot of people.
Particularly young people, maybe people who are in domestic abuse situations, people who may be low income, people who are maybe international students, migrant workers, may not have the choices that everybody has. And so it can be really prohibitive.
Nemard says birth control can range from being free to costing hundreds of dollars. And while she's overjoyed the province is taking action now, she wishes it would also cover the costs of non-prescription birth control methods, such as condoms and the morning after pill. And finally, in case you missed it, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has accepted the Democratic Party's nomination as its presidential candidate. In the wide-ranging 45-minute speech last night, Harris also addressed the war in Gaza.
Now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost.
Harris says she and President Joe Biden are working on that deal right now, one that would also recognize the Palestinian people's right to security. And that's your CBC News from Winnipeg.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for the week, Marcy.
You as well. Thanks, Matt Humphrey, as well as Aaron Broman and out in our news department this morning. Also, I want to just give thanks to the people in our current affairs unit, the people who work in our unit, our associate producers this week, Chloe Friesen, Issa Kickson, Sierra Sanders, Chidi Akuma, Jim Agapito, May McKillop, Bruce Layden, Marshall Hodgins, and Dylan Longhurst. Our community reporter in unit is Shanley Vidal. Hosts in unit this week, Nadia Kidwai, Emily Brass, and Lori Hoogstraten. Producer in our unit, Wendy Parker. Nellie Gonzalez is the overall show producer and current affairs at CBC Manitoba, and Leif Larson is the senior producer of audio. And we get nothing on the air without doing it as a team. I want to make that very clear. So huge thanks to everyone who works so hard here and to make sure that the programs are reflecting you as Manitobans. Big thanks to our guests as well, all the people that join us this week on the program to share stories, and to those of you that call with pushback and feedback and framing, and love that you're listening. Listener lines open anytime. 8:36 a.m. Chloe is back with one last look at the commute and traffic and weather.
The fog advisory is still in effect for the city of Winnipeg, and that fog is kind of covering the Red River Valley this morning, so that could affect your commute. Be very careful. It should dissipate this morning according to the forecast, then looking at a mix of sun and cloud. Forecasted high of 29 with a humidex 35 degrees, and you might want to avoid Keniston and Tuxedo. A lot of lane reductions there might be slowing you down this morning.
All right. Thanks, Chloe. Well, take care, everyone. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great weekend. We're back again on Monday with another edition of Information Radio, and we hope you can join us then on CBC. Coming up next, it's The Current.